Hello and welcome to Pale Reflections, a proud member of the Duff Network where we reflect on Lubbo's most fetching work as it releases. I'm Ruben Morehouse.
And I'm Elliot Diebold.
And for today's reflecting episode, we have two long-time listeners.
Hi, I'm Coro. You can find me on Discord.
And Bird.
I'm Bird, and I'm just happy to be here.
Welcome.
So yesterday was the 3-year anniversary of Deep Impact starting. So this idea for the long-time listeners reflecting episode is working out perfectly. It's been 3 years.
Yeah, true. It's been
a solid 8 since Pact.
Isn't that wild? That's so many years. But yeah, I guess as a celebration of the 8 years it's been since the start of Pact, or the 3 years since the start of us doing Deep Impact and Pale podcasting in general, let's get into reflecting on playing a part, shall we? First, of course, we will go over the arc, just so everyone can remember how it started a while back. In 15.1, Verona was going back home. She reunited with her dad, while David, the child protection guy, kind of awkwardly watched and noticed a lot of their dysfunctions, but didn't really have the ability to do anything. Speaking of dysfunctions that nobody has the ability to do anything about, Verona had a run-in with Matthew and Edith before Matthew escorts her to the hospital and they murder some folks. Thumbs up.
I know I say this every time, but holy shit, that was this arc.
Yeah, I know, right?
15.2, Avery Skypes with her very straight friend Liberty, but they get cut off when the Lord calls her for her new duty. She's going to have to do some spying on people like Thea and Florin, and it'll be fine. So she gets started spying on Florin, and in the meantime also manages to give both Janine and Nora the Sinodrop test, which only Nora passes.
In keeping tabs, Kennet, Lucy and Verona have hashed together a handy reference document for themselves, and also for us.
Mm-hmm.
And also, it's gorgeous. We started by checking in on Lucy and Verona and their connections, magical and mundane, before swinging through the Undercity's factions, the local others by council status, a page just for the goblins, and a list of enshrined spirits around the border.
Those goblin images. So pretty.
I absolutely love the new emote for Biscuit.
They are fantastic.
And then in 15.3, Lucy says goodbye to Wallace. Sitten interrupts and is a shitter. Fetch Verona trolls around a little with telling everyone that she is a fetch. And Bracken makes his thorny introduction as Lucy tries not to be too much of a cop. We get the lowdown on the family man. Then Lucy says goodbye to Verona as well. And then once she's on her own and not fighting and not sure what to do, she decides to play the cult a little music.
Yeah, she goes to a cult sing-along. Hey, we haven't seen Wallace in so long now. I hope he's okay.
I was just thinking about that.
I did say says goodbye to Wallace for a good reason. With all the connection shenanigans going with people, keeping people away from Kennet, I feel like letting him leave sort of is going to be a permanent or semi-permanent.
You think he's not coming back?
I almost think it's cruel to hope he does.
Well, yeah, that's fair. But yeah, it's been over a month for us since Wallace has been gone. 15.3 was November 6th. So, I'm really feeling... I mean, how long has it been in story since Wallace has been gone? It's been a few weeks, right?
Wasn't there a moment in like 15.11 or something where Lucy quickly chatted to Jeremy about it and they both really hadn't heard anything?
Yeah. Yikes.
It definitely felt to me like this was the thing that really cut Lucy off. I guess we'll get into that later, but that really felt like it set the tone. That goodbye really set the tone for how Lucy was coping with everything else that's happened to her this arc.
Yeah, definitely.
Feels like the tether that was cut so that she can spend the rest of this arc focusing entirely on fighting cults.
On the family man, yeah. Verona heads off to visit Avery in 15.4, and she has a real blast getting settled in with all the Thunder Bay locals before having dinner with Avery and their mums, and revealing to Avery that her hand injury has been upgraded to a permanent one. Yay, consequences. Free
upgrade. At 15.5, Verona checks in on Gilhame in a flashback and learns that he's in a bit of a rough patch, and yeah, so is she. We then get a glimpse of how all her various silos are falling apart as she has awkward interactions with her dad, with Jeremy, with Tashlet, and with her mum. She has a bit of insomnia, and she makes some almost mistakes with Jeremy before she and Avery, jump forward and just have a blast summoning some new friends, including the new best other Soot Sleeves.
In 15.6, Lucy tries not to think about grave digging while landscaping with Mia, so instead they talk about all the men and boys that aren't in Lucy's life anymore. Rook pulls Lucy off to join a crack team of smelly, weird operatives to discreetly take Marlin off the board. Jasmine is not happy about these totally legit, completely chill teens in their car filled with good vibes, but Lucy manages to sneak off. Wearing an Oni disguise, Lucy duels Marlin in the middle of the highway. Miss tries a ploy to divert Marlin, who instead flees into Underkennet, directly into the arms of the family man. Great job, everyone.
And then in Keeping Tabs Thunder Bay, we get the most important section, which is the Drop Family intro, and then also some other less important stuff, like the residents of Thunder Bay and how powerful and connected to each other and Kennet they are.
We only care about the Snowdrop family tree and all the ridiculous names that we'll never see.
We need an interlude from Paradrop.
So 15.7, Avery and Verona hang out with Soot Sleeves, getting a lift over to near Thea's base. They head in and start gathering info, making a bit of a mess of things, and unfortunately raising suspicion. Thea strikes and kicks them into the painting, Mario 64 style.
We then switch straight into Verona's head as tensions continue to soar in the battle against the ornithologist in that painting. Blows are flying left and right, but kind of outside of stabbing Thea in the leg, Verona is really feeling like she's struggling to actually do anything or make a difference in this fight. Glossing over the fact that she just, on instinct, finishes Avery's diagram of a finder practice just, by guessing because she's clever. Anyway, they end up inside Thea's vault, and they do some, work inside of other realms before kind of reverse Mission Impossibling their way out of the vault with all of Thea's loot.
In 15.9, we pick up where we left off with Lucy. The family man has grabbed Marlin, and the Bittersweet Witch wants to renegotiate. Shutting down the family man's misogyny, Lucy and the Bittersweet Witch confer a loan. The BSW is tired and wants stability and a way forward for Underkennet, provided the family man isn't part of it. She offers a vision to help them spring Marlin, but warns that if the family man isn't dealt with, she'll be forced to cede to him. Later, Lucy and co. storm the family man's guest house using the Bittersweet Witch's info, killing their way through guards and shooting Marlin in the leg before retreating with her. The next day, they meet the family man's countermove, a group of refugees asking for shelter. Lucy grits her teeth and does the right thing, taking them in.
In 15.10, Lucy gets worried that she's emotionally cheating on Wallace by calling Timon for advice on how to best to neuter the family man's plans, then interrogates her prisoner Marlin and figures out what to do with her and the probably traitorous refugees. Spoiler alert, she beats the shit out of their bosses and arrests the ones that worked with them. Then we close out with Verona and Lucy trusting and loving one another.
And in 15.11, the school is under attack! Lucy breaks out of class a few times to do battle with the family man's family men before attempting a rescue of Miss, which kind of succeeds, I suppose. Having had enough of his shit, the Kenneteers strike, and the family man is castrated a few different ways, with the Undercity, Kennet, and even some out-of-townies all uniting to take him down.
And then to round out the arc, for the interlude, we jump into Gilky's head for 15.z. Gilky's helping to sort of guide suspicions away from Avery regarding the whole Thea stuff in Thunder Bay. Then he heads home for a bit of, relaxing R&R before he goes for a bit of shopping and meets a nice young fae called Marisica, who, he agrees to help because he relates to her own lack of rest.
And that's the end of our arc summaries. So what do we think of this arc?
Well, I'm glad the family man's gone. Although the foreman seems sure he'll be back again, but
Yeah, do you
now.
think the family man will be back? It feels weird. They so thematically defeated him.
It feels like him being back is not going to be the problem so much as everyone else stepping into that vacuum they left and causing the exact problem they tried to avoid by not killing him. Because that symbolic defeat was enough that I just don't see that as being any less significant than murdering him in the eyes of whatever spirits are routing power through Underkennet.
What if the family man will live on in spirit through the foreman? Because we know the foreman is also just a misogynistic piece of shit. So maybe he's talking more metaphorically, and he's going to step up to the plate.
Be a bit weird for you to kill somebody and then say, they'll be back through me. I'm going to become like them.
It does feel like the foreman is a very different brand of misogynistic.
Yeah, he is, but there's always room for growth, or whatever the opposite of growth is.
It is. I am very interested to see more development of what the foreman looks like, because we haven't really had all that much interaction with him. He's mostly been handled off screen and only brought in when it's necessary to bring him in. So as he begins to make himself a problem, I am very interested to see what kind of problem he makes himself.
Yeah, we've heard more about him than we've seen of him.
I'm feeling that a lot in this arc, in that it introduces and plays with a lot of stuff in a way that I feel like will be in future rereads, reading every second sentence of this arc, being like, oh, yeah, that sets up for this. I can see how that ties up with this part of the climax.
So like every other Wild Boar story, basically.
Yeah, pretty much.
I do like this as an arc. Like, this was definitely the arc where we started to, I guess, try to stabilize things. Like, arc 14 was very much the reeling, like, oh shit, how do we keep going from here? And then arc 15 kind of feels like the next step of, like, alongside with finding their feet, the Kenneteers, took out all their biggest problems. Like, we got rid of the family man. We got the free battery from Thea. Avery kind of got her job in Thunder Bay, which has provided a lot of stuff. It's sort of people actually making progress to stop going backwards, I suppose, and like get their feet under them,
and spending time sort of sketching out what they're going to do in the future. Like, they didn't just beat the family man; they beat the family man particularly in a way that would leave them stronger and better prepared for the next threat.
Do you think this arc felt to me like it could be setting up the end of Pale in a few ways? One is setting up what Kennet and the other cities' relationship will look like for the, for whatever the finale could be. But two is Gilkey reintroducing Marisica to the story, right? As well as, obviously, in Avery Land, we've kind of started to figure out who are Muss's pieces and what are they starting to kind of do. I don't know.
Less pulling things together towards the climax and more just sort of reminding you all of the pieces that exist and then pointing them in that direction.
Yeah, exactly.
But I've definitely been wrong before.
That image does bring up a piece of imagery that got sort of pulled out a lot this arc, which is the idea of like picking up pieces and putting them onto the board. Like, we see that a lot in with Thea's game with sort of the imagery of like setting up the armies and then falling into them, with the way that the Lord of Thunder Bay was setting up sort of these holograms for Avery to sort of get a sense of the players she was working with. Even stuff like the way we sort of got to focus on the Bitterstreet Witches' visions as sort of this way of like setting up moments in time to like maneuver around the board. Like, feels like that was an image that got returned to again and again.
Yeah.
What were some of our favorite things from this arc? What did we like the most?
I mean, Soot Sleeves.
That's a good point.
Soot Sleeves.
I have to say, yes, I love Soot Sleeves. I'm still very excited for the song that also is a car with people in it, which is just the weirdest conceptual other, and I just want to see it more.
I still don't understand what it means that the song is the other.
Exactly, that's why it's so enthralling.
Avery gave the note to the people, and it fucks with my concept of personhood in such a fun way.
Mm-hmm.
I really want to know what the experience of being one of these people that is apparently just sort of an auxiliary part of the song is. Like, are they in fact people, but they're just sort of subsumed within the larger entity of the song? Are they just the equivalent of like the song's limbs? Like, what is the deal? Where did they come from?
Yeah, are they a Undercity popping into existence last Thursdayism style, or are they someone who got trapped and meshed into the song? Like, if Charles had have walked past when he was forsworn, would he have been sucked in and trapped in the boot? Or, like, how does that work?
Or what would happen if the song gives a lift to like Avery or Verona? What would that feel like and look like? I really want to know.
I also want to know what the limits on the Tearaway Kid are. Like, he seems very powerful because there was that moment where he like made himself look like infinity times infinity or something. So, like, what else can he make himself look like?
And to what degree was he able to do something with that looking like it?
Yeah.
It is. What I found interesting is that there's this moment where, wearing the Tearaway angel costume, going infinity times infinity, splintering out to the end of the universe. And somehow, not a single other practitioner or other in Thunder Bay seemed to notice that happening, even though it seemed like as soon as it happened, it just like blew away everything, which implies that there's like some very strict limits to how those kinds of disguises can affect people. Like it can only be like you look at him and then experience this thing. It can't be like, he takes on like a Carmine Beast disguise and then is the size of a small town.
Yeah, no,
or
it seems
just
it
step
does
over
seem
one.
it's got some limitations at least, right?
But also Lost, who can tell?
Yeah,
true.
exactly. I think the fun thing about The Lost is Wilbur seems to like sit down when he's making them and try to think of at least one fundamental rule of either like the world or the practice and just like snap it in half. Like, it's always so fun.
And it never feels like a expenditure of power either. It's more of just a fundamental part of who they are. Like, Snowdrop just no-sells glamour that tries to make people not think she's an opossum. It has almost nothing to do with her powers. It's just who she is.
Yeah.
That is something that I've been finding really interesting, and I'm hoping that we'll get a little more on before the end of the story, which is the relationship between Lost, who are these creatures and people and others that by being disconnected from the world have had like the rules that make them interact with the world, Twisted and Oni, who are coming at that a very same goal but doing it deliberately. Like things like the way that Miss and Rook, have clearly been friends for a long time, and I just really want to know, like, how do Oni and Lost generally, and like the scope of the practice and the scope of the world?
Yeah, because you get the impression like the Oni were warriors, like they fought against the practice, whereas the Lost are just either outside of it or like have fallen away from it. So that they're both sort of representative of diverging away from the Seal of Solomon, but in two very different ways. One's very combative, and the other one's very like avoidance based, I suppose.
And then you've got the malicious compliance in the form of the fairy.
Yeah.
So what else jumped out at us from this arc? I think we really got to see Matthew and Edith interacting again, so that was fun.
Oh, poor Matthew. I'm not sure I've ever felt as bad for a fictional character as I have for Matthew in his situation right now. It's just that perfect intersection of like we've seen all the elements that lead up into it and gotten to like him as a character, and then having it just like laid out in this absolutely heart-wrenching way. It's just oh poor Matthew.
I'm a enthusiastic enjoyer of live reads, and every single time the Matthew and Edith section came up, I was literally squirming in my seat. It's just so uncomfortable.
It's so bad.
Yeah, it's rough.
Remember that moment where she says John knew what he was doing?
Oh.
Fuck.
It just hurts.
Yeah. Just.
I love that the most horrifying thing about the crazy candle complex spirit is just her human personality.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or I want to be human, or at least to have human. Speaking of unhealthy home dynamics, I had something I wanted to say about Verona. There's a lot of talk around Verona being neurodivergent in some way, whether it's ADHD or anxiety or something or other. I am not a doctor, and I have a funny feeling that most of the people who are talking about it are also not doctors. But I do have some experience with the effects of poorly managed anxiety and stress, and I do see some of it here. So something a therapist once told me was to consider your level of anxiety as 3 distinct zones, sort of similar to the horizontal striped flags that you see in like Germany or like Latvia. I just pulled up a
Latvia, yeah.
Yeah, France.
Oh, interesting fact. Latvia's flag is carmine red. Looks kind of brown to me. But yeah, so the bottom third is sort of like the depression zone where you have no anxiety to the point where you have no drive, no motivation, nothing. You're just sort of sad potato. The middle third is when you are sort of engaged and motivated. There's a little bit of anxiety that gives you a bit of drive to go about your day and do things. Excitement is probably a better term for it in the middle zone. And then the top zone is when you are very anxious, and that can short term be productive, but nobody can maintain that level of motivation and enthusiasm, and they eventually burn out and go down to crash straight through the productive zone and into depression. And that sort of sounds like Verona to me, where she's heavily engaged into something creative or whatnot, and then eventually she crashes down to earth and has a really bad time of it, usually to do with Brett. And you talked about the post about Verona's behavior in relation to Brett, right? With the cycle of abuse and poking him. Was it Sengachi who said that?
That sounds familiar, yes.
Yeah, I think it was Sengachi, but it's got a sort of similar cycle with the explosion, the reconciliation, and then the honeymoon cycle. And so, like, there's the blow up, and then they try and fix everything, and then they are productive for a little while, except there's always that looming sort of blow up. And so Verona is perpetually aware that no matter how hard she goes, she's going to burn out and sort of fall apart a little.
I think one thing that occurs to me as you say that is that when Verona has that crash down to earth, it's when she's the most terrifying. I think like the moments that Verona has crashed down to earth in the wake of building stress have been the times that she's done some of her most extreme but also just sheerly badass things. And I'm really worried for how that cycle of achieving things when she's in her worst places and what that's doing to her expectations and how she's managing her stress.
Yeah, I really like that observation because if you think about, the Kenneteers got the furs in 9.9 after her dad broke her mask. It's almost like it reminds me as well of when we had that Matthew interlude, or no, it might have been Edith's interlude, and Matthew had specifically taken like guilt out of himself so that he could do all the crazy shit he did that night. And then he was like, I'll feel bad about this later when I put it back in. And like, obviously Verona has chased Half-Light stuff here and there throughout the story because she's related a bit to that, like trying to pack away things like that at various times. So it's kind of, just a natural form of Half-Light practice where you hit a bad point. And so you just kind of shut parts of yourself down, and then that lets her do some crazy shit. And it's, it's not something you want getting rewarded.
Yeah, and that's part of what I'm thinking about why the anxiety sort of 3-step model, I'm not actually sure what that's called, works, is because she knows that she's high functioning in that top third. and she knows that she will not be as effective afterwards when she's crashed afterwards. And so as she is falling apart, like at the end of the BHI, like the examples we were just talking about, she pushes so hard to make sure she finishes whatever she's done so that she can crash safely, and that making sure that desperation to finish is part of what drives the anxiety in the first place.
Yeah.
And so she's like,
when you put it like that, that is terrifyingly relatable. Thanks.
Oh, yeah. I have to admit, I'm having another one of those moments where somebody's explaining why they think Verona's neurodivergent. I am just sitting here going, yeah, that's normal. It's very relatable. I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah.
And because we were talking about Matt and Edith and that cycle of explosion, reconciliation, and honeymoon with Brett and Verona, it's sort of interesting because Matt has been tricked into thinking that Edith is the victim because he's afraid of the explosion that he might do in the form of the Doom. He's afraid of the explosion that might happen if the Doom gets out. And so even though he's never done anything wrong, he still has that anxiety and depression. Just he has practiced himself into a corner to prevent the actual explosion. And so it just means that he's functional for a little while, and then he gets very worried, and then he sort of stops doing things. And that gives Edith that like leash on him.
Yeah. I mean, he's literally holding it all inside himself all the time.
Exactly.
And yeah, I suppose because you're right, like this metaphor kind of ties over to the way he lets the Doom out, and it's just like crazy cool and crazy powerful. But it's also on a timer now because it's not getting the free upgrades that Marisica was helping to give it. So like there's this sense to Matthew that as that anxiety and the Doom go away, he will be kind of weaker and less able to do the just insane shit that he does.
And even when he wasn't waiting for it to die or fade away or get ground up in himself or whatever is going to happen there was the anxiety of letting it out for too long and it hurting Edith, or not letting it out long enough and it not being effective. And so there's always that nagging feeling of, oh, have I done this right? Have I done this right? Could I do this better? Oh, I've got to get things exactly perfect before I let it out. And that sort of weird self-defeating perfectionism is just really easy for anxiety to get its hooks into.
Can we talk a bit about, like, clearly there's a bit of a connection drawn within the text, within Verona's mind, between Brett and Matthew. I find it just really interesting how Verona is navigating these two kind of parental, where the kind of is for a very different reason in each of them, relationships in her life. And like, I mean, it's clearly something that she herself is like thinking about and drawing attention to and trying to understand. And I just think it's really fascinating that she's, even if she's still sort of in the situation, even if she's still sort of sinking through like these cycles of abuse and reconciliation with Brett, she's been able to sort of pull her, like, the bits of herself together enough to recognize how that cycle can be escaped for people that aren't herself. And I just think that's really fascinating, especially when there's so many lines drawn between like this person that she's feeling compassion for and the person that's abusing her.
Yeah, like, because the other person who got compared to her dad in her mind a bunch was Ken, and it was usually when Ken was being, his normal dickheaded self. It's interesting, like, how she balances that, I guess, comparing Matt to her dad in her head, but almost in a way where I feel like she's usually trying to overcome her prejudice a bit, maybe, like, sort of acknowledging maybe to a degree that that's like a link she's making that's unfair because Matt is doing a lot better than her dad in some ways.
What it feels like, it kind of feels like she sees Matt as the version of her dad whose complaints about the world are legitimate and rooted in things that she can understand.
What the dad who actually understands her, because the other thing Matt gives her that Brett doesn't is actually hearing and understanding her end of things too.
That's absolutely true. And yeah, between being able to anchor the things that are afflicting him in the practice, which he understands so well, and him, being a decent person that wants to listen to and help her, it's very heartwarming, but in such a tragic way, how quickly and easily she and Matthew become these sort of, I don't know if healthy is the right word, but at the very least, like, mutually respectful kind of partners with a relationship that feels a little bit paternal, but not in a way that like oversteps the bounds that she has around those kind of things.
Yeah.
More of a back and forth.
Yeah, I like that.
I think it would be.
I don't know if it was in this arc or maybe the last one, but that moment where she has the D&M with Matt, and then she basically talks him into getting out of the house, and he goes and bunks with Louise for a bit, and it was a great case of somebody giving out the advice they really need to take on their own selves, because like Matthew had all these reasons why giving up the house wasn't a solution for him, and she made him realize that they weren't worth it. And as much as we want Verona to stay in Kennet, I think it's just the more we sit on it, the more I'm like, I think her going and living with her mum is actually the right call. She's just not ready to admit it to herself yet.
And Avery is proving it.
Yeah. It sucks to leave Lucy alone, I know, but like
That's
to a certain degree, your own life has to get some priority.
And to be honest, it's not as though Verona isn't leaving Lucy alone right now anyway.
Yeah, true. Yeah, barely noticed the difference.
Like the main difference would be there would be less magical violence on the Kenneteers' behalf in Kennet below, and Verona would actually potentially be, growing and at least suffering less.
I mean, that could be the interesting thing as the Undercity starts to stabilize. Is Verona going to, be a victim of her own success a bit, in that, she won't have an isolated job to do anymore? Because if things get stable, if they beat the family man, it looks like they have the foreman on side now, at least temporarily. Yeah, is there going to be a bit of a, she won't have it as an escape anymore, I guess, if it's a more stable place with leaders who are involved with the Kennet Council.
I wonder if she's going to find a way to... The thing about Verona is that she always knows how to keep digging. And I have complete faith in her to, if she manages to stabilize under Kennet to the point that it's no longer a dangerous situation that needs her constantly managing it, to find another dangerous situation that needs her constantly managing it, if that's what is required to keep her engaged in that kind of self-defeating isolation that she feels that she deserves.
If I might speak hypocritically for a moment, surely she's about to hit the point where all the various silos of stuff she's built up are getting that bad that she can't keep doing that, right? We had that one chapter where, things were bad at home with Brett, but that's normal. But then, things went bad with Jeremy as well, and then things went bad with Tashlit, and it was sort of this whole chapter was dedicated to showing us how Verona's coping mechanism of just running away to a new vector to avoid the problems of the other one isn't sustainable, and surely that's going to catch up with her soon, and she'll get better.
Quote Verona, hold my beer.
See, that's the thing. It's not sustainable, but she'll find a way to keep doing it.
Well, yeah, you can always add more silos, right? That's the thing with that process.
Exactly.
If she finds, as you said, if she finds somewhere new that needs protecting, she can't keep it. But surely it'll catch up with her eventually.
I mean, the thing is that as it catches up to her, things will crash and burn and turn bad, and she'll just turn her back on those and move on to new things, until she can find a way to pull the pieces of herself together and address those things in a healthy manner. It's no amount of consequences coming to bear is going to fix the problem with her behavior in response to those problems.
Yeah, like it's not like the consequences haven't been catching up to her already. Look at her home life. Look at her hand. Look at the state of Kennet. Like the hand in particular. Like she's got a mostly non-obvious injury due to a probably pointless paternal twist of fate that leaves her mostly functional, but the pain of it is constantly interrupting her day-to-day life. Sure doesn't sound anything like a home life.
These injuries, I mean, there's such a it's so easy to draw a line between that and the breaking of her mask and the way she's trying to pull her hand back together with the way that she's trying to pull her identity back together through the mask. And I find it interesting that Verona is someone that really understands and embraces aesthetics, and this is an aesthetic that has basically been thrust upon her. It's not really anything that she has chosen. It's this sort of aesthetic of things stitched together, things partially broken. It's just become something that she's been pulled into and that she's struggling to deal with from someone that is so focused on um, looking a certain way, like presenting herself in a way that feels right to her. There's so much control lost over it. Obviously, not to the extent or in the same way that Lucy feels that, but I think it's still a very, very strong through line.
Yeah, and I don't think she would be as obsessed with her sharp edges if the brokenness hadn't been as imposed on her.
Yeah, it's a good point.
I'm thinking back to the beginning of the story where we got perspectives from Verona and we got perspectives from Lucy talking about what their relationship to their clothes in. And for Lucy, it's all about, or like Lucy at the start of the story, it was all about being bulletproof, being impervious to outside criticism or judgment. Whereas for Verona, it was all about aligning her appearance with her idea of who she wanted to be in a way that didn't really take into consideration how other people were judging her. It was all, the first thing we see her wear is a sweater that she's been wearing for so long. She's worn holes in it because it's very her, and she only gets rid of it because it's worn through to the point it's unsalvageable. And I think that that's very interesting in the context of like her broken mask, her injured hand, the way that she's even the way that she's presenting certain elements of her personality to the fetch to interact with Kennet above for her. It feels like it all ties back to that sense of needing to express like these certain things about her without consideration to how they come across to other people.
Yeah, she dresses for herself, not for other people, which was very different to Lucy, as you said. Whereas Avery, I guess, just seems to chuck on whatever, as long as it kind of looks comfortable and makes sense.
Well, I think Avery still dresses for herself. I just think Lucy and Verona are more performative about the way they dress.
Yeah.
Lucy for others, Verona for herself.
The sense I get of how Avery dresses, especially more confident Avery, is that every time she makes reference, or a lot of the times that she makes reference to the things she's wearing or the way she's presenting, she thinks of it in context of what does she admire or find attractive in other people. It's
true, yeah.
Like think of the conversation she has with Nora about the hoodie shorts, where she like draws the direct line to, I saw this in the Wraith Nightmare. Obviously not saying it in so many words, but it looked really cute on a girl there, so I went and found something like it. And I think that the way each of them relate to, and now I'm thinking about it, in terms of like the implement domain familiar relationship, right? Where Lucy, who went for implement first, it's all about how she relates to the world, how she expresses herself. Verona, who we know really needs a domain and has been, working towards that or something in that vein for a long time. It's all about like expressing her inner self and like being comfortable in her own skin. And Avery, who it's all about connections, who went for a familiar the first time she met another she felt like a connection to. It's all about like what she sees in other people and how she wants what she thinks is important to and for other people.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like that. I love your observation about how Avery's taking and emulating the best parts of others fashion wise, because it's what she does person wise too.
And I feel like
Absolutely.
because Avery is the one who's sort of the most got her shit together at the moment. We're going to spend less time talking about Avery, but I do just want to point out how much of a baller move it was that she took a nightmare fuel and turned it into a fashion statement.
I mean, that's kind of what she's been doing a lot. I'm thinking of the way that she's embraced stuff like being a vegetarian, coming from possibly the worst nightmare you could ever have, and it being an effect of that. She's taken that, and she doesn't seem to regard that as being like a burden or a scar on herself. She just sort of runs with it and sees it as a way to have learned something and be better.
Yeah, she doesn't dwell on it. She accepts it. She makes changes as she sees fit, and then she just moves on.
Let's talk about Lucy. Let's talk about poor Lucy. Oh my god. Verona feels... There's an extent to which I feel like Verona and Lucy almost switched places in this arc, because we've talked about how Verona is broken, is constantly falling apart and pulling herself together, is sort of embroiled in all these toxic struggles. But there's an upside to that too, in that she's using that as a way to reach out to other people that she sees sort of embroiled in these same kinds of cycles, other people that are sort of broken in the way that she recognizes brokenness and finds connection. Lucy, I think the most positive, heartwarming moment she's had this entire arc was when she said goodbye to Wallace, which was immediately ruined by teachers storming in, pulling them apart, and every interaction she's had since then has been colored by something. Every positive interaction, she's become suspicious of Rook's morals and ethics around how Rook is strategizing. She's coming into conflict with her mom over the practice stuff. The positive connection she's trying to build with the dog tags just constantly remind her of John. Even when she's having just a good mundane time hanging out with Mia, I guess doing landscaping for their parents, she's still thinking about grave digging and all the people that have left her. And I am so worried about Lucy. She still has what feel like the strongest connections to other people, but it feels like those connections are not becoming so much weakened as just made inaccessible by circumstance, and she's really left with so little.
Well, I think like really she has two strong connections left, because most of the other men in her life went and died or winterfied. But like she had Verona, and obviously her and Verona haven't been doing so hot until it looks like they're maybe on the path to recovery now. And then her mum is the other one, and that's sort of been poisoned by the practice, and I guess Booker's just away. But I kind of feel like, once you've taken Jasmine and Verona out of the equation, I don't know that Lucy has anyone I can point to as, oh, this person can be there to have Lucy's back. Well, maybe Wallace, but he left her too. So I don't know. I'd actually say that she is kind of the one who's just the most alone right now. Like Verona kind of spent arc 14 on like a sort of self-imposed exile. Whereas Lucy's just kind of had everyone leave her, and Jasmine's the exception, but she can't actually talk to Jasmine because of the practice.
Yeah, you mentioned that Wallace might be able to have her back, and it brings to mind, which chapter was it? 15.10, when she calls Timon for help, and she's worried that she's sort of emotionally cheating on Wallace. It's because Wallace couldn't offer what she needed at the time. She needed help in the practice, and Wallace is innocent. And I don't think that's a dig on Wallace. Like, they've been together for like a few weeks maybe, and he's innocent and he's got his own shit going on. But I feel like that would be what Lucy would want it to develop into. Like, I think she would be pretty quick to awaken Wallace in safer circumstances and bring him up to speed and lean on him, as well as like have him lean on her. Like, I think that's what she's looking for in a relationship, and that's largely because of what we're talking about with Verona and Jasmine being sort of her pillars, but neither of them can be everything she needs. Like she wants to build that life where she can have a person who is her person.
The terrifying thing about awakening, or even just making someone aware so they can be like a blackguard like they want to do with Melissa in a relationship, is just, it feels like you're permanently changing their life in a very substantial way. Like if you break up, or like, you've, and I mean, this is true of any relationship. Like you never come out of a relationship the same person you were going in, obviously, but maybe not to the degree that awakening or making someone aware would do to them.
Yeah, and I feel like they're still like 13, 14, and this might be a bit stereotyping 13, 14-year-olds, but their relationships tend not to be very long lasting. And imagine if one of your high school exes was also karmically responsible for you.
Yeah,
forever.
Exactly. Like...
Oh, that's horrifying. Oh God.
Or if you were responsible karmically for your high school exes.
Honestly, I think I could swing that. I feel like it's worse the other way around.
Look, neither are good.
Yeah.
Neither are good.
I think like the other interesting thing with Lucy is as well, and I don't know how much we've talked about it on the podcast because I haven't really felt it like click for me, like where I know where it's going. But a lot of like Lucy's coping, particularly in this arc, has felt very Verona-ish to me. Like I'm thinking of particular, there were a number of moments in that triple set of chapters she had right at the end where she would like, every time Verona shows up, she's very cautious to make sure she looks competent and that she's taking care of everything for Verona, which just touched on that same insecurity that's almost defined Verona for 6 arcs now, which is this side of Verona that wants people to acknowledge how competent she is. And I think it is coming from a different place with Lucy because she's trying to connect with Verona, so she wants Verona to be able to keep trusting her with things. So when Verona did trust her with something, she's gone like all in on it. But it's this interesting kind of thing that's jumped out to me where while Lucy feels like she's acting a bit like Verona in that way, I can't help but feel that this is a consequence of some of the stuff Verona has done with their relationship. Like maybe that's not totally fair because it was also partially Lucy's fault that they had the big fight. But the way Verona sort of refuses to talk things out has meant that Lucy's had to play these same games of constantly trying to appear tough and competent and not communicate with her. And it's just like this, what I would describe as a bad coping mechanism is spreading.
Absolutely agreed.
Yeah, they're just under a lot of stress, and it's not a environment conducive to making the best choices. But
I was thinking, what unhealthy things has Avery learned from Verona and or Lucy, and how has she been implying those?
I'll have you know that Avery is in fact perfect.
No, I definitely think that Avery has taken a lot of that sense of not taking shit from people from Lucy. Like, if you think back to just how incredibly tough it was for Avery to come out at the start of the story versus now how just unashamedly proud of her identity she is, I would be willing to attribute some of that to the lessons she's learned from being Lucy's friend, because Lucy is very unapologetically like herself and black. So that would be what I'd say is like, I guess some of the confidence being who she is probably comes from Lucy.
Yeah. Well, that's a good thing. I'm thinking specifically of like the way Lucy and Verona have been trading unhealthy coping strategies.
Right, yeah.
And how much of that has leaked over to Avery.
It doesn't seem like much.
Yeah.
Like, because Avery's still very non-confrontational. If I like, my first instinct is, if I'm looking for something unhealthy that somebody picked up from Lucy, it would be to notice if they've been more unnecessarily confrontational. But if I had to put that on anyone's floor at the moment, that would be Verona. And that still doesn't feel totally right. I guess we are recording this after Ruben and I have recorded our first episode of Arc 16's reflecting, just the regular Arc 16 episode. And there was a theory from Pale Predictor in that feels very relevant to this, about the idea that maybe the scales of the trio are tipping towards Avery. Maybe as Verona and Lucy are sinking a bit in Kennet, within the trio, they're just trading bad stuff and Avery's getting all the goodness.
Because Avery is the protagonist.
Yeah, I mean,
and what Lucy and Verona are just there to, be there
her
for a
friends.
little while and then disappear towards the later end of the story as Avery takes over.
No. Yeah, you can still be the deuteragonist and be awesome. I mean, just look at Toph.
I see.
Yeah, no, Pale's subtitle in Bird's Head is Avery and Friends, I'm pretty sure.
Yes.
It's Pale, or The Fabulous Emancipation of Avery Kelly.
I mean, I guess while we're on that topic, do we quickly want to touch on the bet? Like, well, we're already half done with the best Kenneteer.
I think we know who Bird would say.
So,
Coro.
best Kenneteer. This arc, Verona. Poor Verona, but there's just something that I find just incredibly compelling about watching her sort of desperately trying to find her balance, even if she's mostly failing. I can't choose, but if you make me choose this arc, Verona.
Okay. So but you hate Lucy and Avery. I've got it. Yeah.
I'm so proud of Avery for, like, it is so difficult, especially as a teenager, to make yourself a new life in a new town. And Avery has been absolutely killing it, and also espionage. But
she's literally a super spy now. Yeah.
But exactly. Verona, I hope you're better. I hope you get better.
Avery continues to be like the person I want to be, which it feels so weird to call like a 14-year-old fictional girl like a role model, but I guess here I am. I also find myself like Thunder Bay in general, the last two arcs has probably been like my favorite. Like, when you pick it up and see it's going to be a Thunder Bay chapter, that's probably the one that the most makes me go, oh, yay. But that's probably just more of a reflection on how shit Kennet is. Like, just it as a depressing place versus like Thunder Bay is much more that like whimsical fun energy a lot of the time. Whereas Kennet is like, oh, I got to buckle up emotionally for a Kennet chapter. I
mean, it is a little. I think if there's anything that we've learned through Avery's explorations of Thunder Bay is that place is fucked up. If you dig anywhere beneath the surface. But yeah, I definitely understand how that... what I find so fascinating about anytime we touch on Thunder Bay is that it's like this vision of where things are normal and how that normal is...
shit.
Exactly. it's like it presents like this facade of normality where it seems like the biggest conflicts around are the the council effectively just like yelling at each other like they're a HOA. But
oh god, that scene with Nicole getting eaten out by Deb and Anne is just so funny. Like just like I wish I'd had popcorn while I was reading that.
I'm sorry, did you mean chewed out?
Chewed out.
Sorry, what did I say?
Yes, that's we only get that one on everyone's become a Patreon to Wildbow at the $15 level.
For exclusive fan art. No.
Exclusive.
The comparison to a HOA is very accurate, I think, to just transition away from Elliot's foot in mouth moment.
What did I say? I don't even know. I'm very tired right now. I'm not following what's happening.
Listen back to the receipts later.
Sorry, I just had to mute myself for a little while. I was just absolutely cackling.
What were we talking?
Anyway, the
HOA. Yeah, speaking of homeowner associations, I think we might have you guys might have touched on this before in previous episodes, but Melissa really needs to be on the council as an aware, possibly a blackguard, but let's not stress too much on lying, because for one, it's a great way to sort of hear and have represented the perspective of the useless innocents who nevertheless deserve to live full and happy lives. And Bracken is less useless, but also a representative example. Like these people might have only come into existence last Thursday, but they're still people. And at the moment, it just doesn't. The council is basically a couple of practitioners beholden to others. And if it's only others on the council, then sort of the title of other almost becomes ironic because they're the only people who are getting represented. And we saw that with the integration between magic and innocence that Ken lacked, and that ultimately led to him dying. And so, in order for the Kennet as we know it to exist, or at least a continuation of that ideal, it's got to include practitioners, which we're sort of seeing with the practitioners coming in via the trio, as well as the trio themselves. And it's got to include the innocents, which is more and more relevant with Bristow's aware, and then Melissa and Bracken, and presumably in the future Jasmine. The council, it was sort of a walled commune for mutual safety, but if they're going to bring it out onto the world stage to be representative of a new way of practicing, they need it to be bigger. They need it to be more.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think that Melissa specifically should be on the council because Melissa, but I think that someone like Louise would be a really good addition to becoming getting a greater access to what Kennet's doing and what it's becoming. Melissa, I think Melissa, she's going to find her way into things no matter what you do.
Yeah, and that's sort of why
I
wanted her to be on the council, because if she's not on the council, then she's going to find her way in there as a victim, or as being awakened, or being turned into another, or some other deeply unfortunate and very annoying method. Whereas if she's on the council, then at least she's kept aware. Pardon the pun.
Nice.
But when you think about it, when Lucy was telling Melissa to stay away from Kennet below, Melissa wanted the answers. She said, how do I get there? And then she defended it by saying, if I know how to get there, then I know how to not to get there, which was absolutely a lie. And if she's made...
It's okay, Bracken came to her.
Yeah, if she's made aware of this sort of stuff, then at least she can make her own decisions instead of sort of making a decision based on just wanting to be involved.
I agree.
It's interesting, though, the concept of integrating aware into the council could possibly fall into some of the same traps as Ken, in that kind of by definition to become aware involves slipping out of being an innocent and being a part of that aspect of society. Like if you think about like Melissa in large part became aware because she was isolated and alone, and it's the same with Louise. Like it's arguable how good a voice of the innocence they would be, considering they are the people let down by the system. And as I say it like that, that possibly means they're the best people to have input. But yeah,
I think the important thing for a community as small as Kennet is less that they are strongly connected to like all aspects of innocent life, and more just that there is a way to make them part of a community. Because in part that's one of the things that's worst about being aware, is that you're constantly held away from the community of the practice that involves practitioners and others, while at the same time being to greater or lesser degrees cut off from innocent life. I think just as a matter of like being good for the aware in Kennet, having them integrated into the council and having a sense of community that they can gather around without, for example, falling into the arms of the witch hunters would be really cool.
Yeah, and like the witch hunter example is another sort of failure state that I was envisioning for, say, Bracken or Melissa, where like, they need that path to avoid the failure states. And with regards to the innocence thing, you can't have a like capital I fully innocent person on the council just because like the very act of being on the council would remove their innocence.
Definitionally.
Yeah. But aware haven't lost their innocence. Oh my god, I've forgotten his name. The Warhold time looper guy. Ted, yeah. Ted, even though he was very well informed and knew specific practitioners and their practices and how to fight them, and had done that how many thousands of times, like he still held on to some degree of innocence. And so, and he's a pretty extreme example of like almost all of the innocence being stripped away. And then there's like Daniel and Shelley, like they are still innocent and they still benefit from the seal and, you know, society preventing them being predated on any further than they already have been. And so they would represent the innocence, like the fully innocent people, in that they're protecting that degree of I don't want to say normalcy that they're trying to protect, but like their lives. They want to live their happy, healthy lives as best they can. And the others aren't necessarily going to protect those interests. Like Miss, for example, was very sort of hands off, with protecting innocence. And Rook is, I think, said that she had not a whole lot of respect for innocence as an institution. And you know, you go through the list of others, and they're all going to be somewhat like that. You need someone who's, you know, a representative of that. They need representation. And Melissa isn't the best we've got, but you know, she's what we've got.
What we've got.
I mean, to be fair, that was explicitly why Matthew created Ken in the first place. And, well, we saw how that worked out.
Yeah, but we also saw that was like a Marisica plot. So, like, there's a chance that the principle was sound. It was the execution that was fucked with.
Oh, absolutely. I just think it's very funny that, like, that Matthew had exactly these thoughts and did his best to make it happen. And this is how he was rewarded.
I think Melissa, specifically even, and Aware generally, sort of counteract some of the issues that Ken had, where Ken's big issue was that he didn't really actively represent anything. He was passive, he was not a fighter. He rolled over at every opportunity and refused to help at every opportunity. Melissa also rolls over at every opportunity and refuses to help at every opportunity, but she's also a little bit more active. Like she does to some degree like pursue her own interests. She does, like, she is a person in a way that Ken never was, or was never allowed to be. Like, Ken was crafted to be a tool, whereas Melissa got there all on her own.
She did become a tool all on her own. Very true.
I mean, it is. You said something about Melissa and Bracken, how them becoming witch hunters is a fail state, but oh my god, that would make such a good like TV show. I would absolutely follow the adventures of Melissa and Bracken being snarky and punching their way through supernatural problems as witch hunters. Oh my god, that would be amazing.
Oh, I'm envisioning it very differently, right? So Melissa, she's never going to be a puncher. She's probably always going to have that issue with her leg. She's not really a someone who's likely to be terribly physically powerhousey in the near future, or even in the distant future. Instead, she just leans on her spectacular abilities to be impediment, and just sort of walks into a fairy court and is just surly and grumpy and interrupts everything else, just so Bracken can walk in and actually like swing the punches and, you know, hunt the witches.
And you've got the classic will they, won't they, because Melissa clearly is interested and Bracken just seems to have no fucking clue.
And every time she tries to corner him, Bag comes into the room and says, "Oh, hey, can you help me with dinner or something?"
Oh my god, yes, Bag. Oh, this TV show is getting better and better.
Yeah, so anyone except the CW, hit us up.
What do you mean except? They would make a glorious mess of that.
It would be wonderful.
If the first ever Otherverse TV adaptation is by the CW, a little part of me will die inside.
The first ever Wildbird TV adaptation. I think it would be hilarious. It's such a monkey's paw situation.
Yeah, what a wish.
I feel like, see, the thing about the Otherverse is that you can find a way to fit just about any genre of story in there. And I'm sure there's a way to craft a story in the Otherverse such that the way that CW does shows just fits it like a key.
That's true. I was envisioning specifically like Pact or Pale. I suppose if you did like a Poke-like adaptation, I guess, you know, we shouldn't get too specific because no Poke spoilers, but I could see the CW doing something like Poke in a fun way.
Oh, God.
Oh, God.
I mean, you know, Poke's not my first choice for the visual adaptation, but y'all are putting this CW limitation on me, and that changes things.
He says as though he doesn't watch all of the CW.
Oh, I've cut myself off. I stopped doing that now. I used to watch too much of it, but...
I'm proud of you.
So am I. Okay, well, I guess we should get back to some of the other questions that we always ask our guests in these episodes. I think the other big one aside from favorite... Actually, Ruben, did you ever tell us who your favorite Kenneteer is?
Lucy is the answer, to be honest. Lucy, it comes close to going back to Avery. It was Avery for a little bit at the start of the story, but Lucy's just having such a good time. All the stuff with the family man, all the bits with her trying to mold grandfather. I mean, like, it's just so fun to read.
Okay, but yeah, coming back to you, Coro and Bird, which Kennet other would be your first choice for familiar?
All right, Bird, you look like you've got like a more thought out answer here. You want to go first?
Okay, so first the honourable mentions. Nibble and Chloe would be a good little mutual arrangement. I give them a break from their struggles and some stability, and I get a sick transformation and probably some serious oomph and durability in life and death stuff. So that's why I think that they'd be good options for being a familiar in general, but I don't think it'd be a good fit for me personally to obsess over death and physical might. It seems something that it'd be beneficial if I was planning on getting on in a lot of fights, which I do not. And also, like, which would you take? Like, taking both is an option, but I have a funny feeling they would sort of overwhelm you with the amount of like death focus when you're sort of the one in the three that has like that level of vitality.
Sorry, can you take both? I thought you could only have one familiar unless you like muster it, which I like don't recommend just morally.
I think there was a discussion of taking some as like a pair.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, they are a couple. I don't. Yeah, I wonder what the limits are there.
Yeah, I it'd be worth looking into, but then also shoot yourself in the foot because then you're just going to overwhelm. Like their pairing is going to be stronger than you personally. Like I haven't got that much of a sense of self, you know. So
I get the sense that like anytime you're talking about a like big modification to one of like the big three rituals, the answer is usually you can absolutely do that, and you'll probably regret it.
Which is pretty much the conclusion
sure
I came to. Yeah. It's like if you take two familiars, you're going to get overwhelmed.
Yeah.
The next one on the table is Dish. I don't know. I just vibe with her as like a nice person to live with, so to speak. Like she's all about purity and aesthetic and cleanliness. She doesn't mind it if you like break the glassware every now and again.
She'd be a good roommate, is what you're saying.
Yeah. And so like I think she'd be a nice fit, but I just don't think she's developed enough as an individual to be like closer to having like a pet than a partner, and that seems very off to me. But you know, if you give her a few hundred years and maybe a bit of complexity and leave her in the boundary to Kennet for a while to accumulate power, maybe she could be a good familiar for someone someday. But
okay, so these were the runners up, right?
Yeah, they were the honorable mentions. But the real answer is Tashlet. Like she's powerful, versatile, but not in a like exclusively fighty way. She's going to be around for a long time and isn't quite done shedding her humanity. So I feel like I'd be able to give her like a more intentional sort of dalliance with humanity before her metamorphosis sort of completes and she moves on to her divinely long life. Like I could give her that sort of security instead of life doing the equivalent of ripping the blanket out from under. And it's like, hey, by the way, you're an eye monster now. So I can sort of hit the snooze button on that, so to speak, and we have like a good life together. And, you know, she's also quite awesome. And I could offer a lot to her besides that, like, you know, house, music, friends, very similar to what Verona is doing, which is, I don't think, an accident. The drawbacks would be I'd probably have to have a more modular style of home in that, like, I don't think it would be a terribly marriage-like affair. It'd be more of a, like, close friendship colleagues. And so she'd probably have to have her own sort of living area, particularly because I am definitely going to have cats. And ideally, you know, a family and a life of my own. And so I wouldn't want to be sort of paired with her too closely in every aspect.
You're hitting these Verona beats.
Yep, got me. Yeah. So Tashlet, good familiar for both me and for Verona.
Yeah, sorry. Actually, speaking of, we should touch on Verona offering Tashlet the familiar job, and obviously the awkwardness that's followed. Like, what's everyone's reads on that moment?
I'm so behind it.
I guess I'm more thinking like from the perspective of why do you think Tashlet hasn't said yes or no? Like this sort of emotions. Like Verona's obviously carrying a lot of, oh, I've made things awkward and I've ruined this friendship a bit. Train. Like, do you think that that's at all fair? Like, do you think Tashlet does feel awkward? Like, yeah. What do you guys reckon is going on on Tashlet's side of that offer?
I think that Tashlet sees it as she sees herself as still like developing and still coming into who she is as a person, and like that was a huge part of like how she connected with Verona. Even was sort of talking about like all the places she's gone and things she's done, and sort of learning to like connect with Verona in the here and now. I think she sees that as like just too much of a commitment before she's come into herself. I think she's thinking, oh my god, if I do this, then I'm going to sort of interfere with the development of who I am. And like, it's like, she's been pretty clear in the past of like, even when like the way that she's been developing and growing as like an other has been causing her problems, she's still been fundamentally okay with it and been okay with embracing her nature to an extent while not like diving into it. I think she sees this as like the equivalent of like, you know, your best friend in high school asking to move in with you for the rest of your life. It's like she's just not ready for it.
Yeah, I do want to qualify. I'm all behind it as a concept. I absolutely would slap both of them upside the head if they propose doing the ritual tomorrow. Like, I think it's more of a we're skipping to marriage when maybe we should date a little first, you know?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the inherent problem with the familiar ritual is there needs to be like a probation period.
Yeah, and that sort of, you could skip that a little with Snowdrop, because Snowdrop's past is Avery's past, and so with a very small marsupial segment. But yeah, and so Avery has sort of spent 13 years trialing living with Snowdrop and then sort of committed to that, whereas Verona met Tashlet like, what, a month ago? Maybe a bit more?
Maybe a little bit
than
more,
that.
but yeah, a couple of months, like, you know.
Yeah, the fact that it's
area.
not definitely just a month ago when I'm thinking of it, like, you definitely need a little bit more time than that. And like, maybe, I mean, I guess they did go on a holiday together, which is kind of like dating, but yeah, I feel like that relationship needs work. And that's even putting aside the fact that, as Coro said, Tashlet sort of has a bit of working on herself to do, and Verona certainly does.
Yeah, see, I definitely was in the same space as Verona, as assuming the main reason Tashlet isn't saying yes is because Tashlet is under the impression that that question came from a bad place. Like, I think the sort of the way Verona asked it was like very much had that energy if she was having some internal panic and just popped it out of nowhere and like hadn't thought it through. And so I very much was just assuming that Tashlet felt the same and kind of wanted to let Verona sit on the concept for longer before saying yes or no.
Which I think is a very healthy approach.
Well, you could maybe communicate that better, rather than like leaving her hanging, maybe necessarily saying, ask me again in 2 weeks or whatever. Like, yeah.
I do.
You're right there. I like your idea of not necessarily doing the ritual tomorrow. I like the idea of saying, hey, do you want to be my familiar? Yeah, I think so. It's like, cool, let's like hang around for a year. And if we both still feel that way, like talk about it more seriously.
It's sort of a declaration of intent more than an actual ritual.
Yeah,
like a loose engagement. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think part of it on Tashlet's end is the familiar ritual is a way for others to bring themselves or to borrow humanity for a time. Like, what they get out of it is being able to sort of escape their essential natures for a bit and just be a little creature for a while. And I don't think that that's something that Tashlet feels a deep need for. So I think part of it is Tashlet doesn't really see what she would get out of the relationship beyond I'm Verona's familiar and Verona's cool.
So that's interesting. I have a bit of a different read on Tashlet. I kind of got the impression she is not a fan of a lot of the changes she's been going through because they've been making like harder for her. She's just really good at coping. Like I almost got the impression she's not happy about it, but she's got a very like, well, there's nothing I can do about it sort of attitude, and so she's very just sort of able to keep trucking.
Yeah, and I don't think it's an accident that that she's living in, you know, a house and listening to music and wearing clothes and whatnot. She could just stay in the water permanently, Thunder Bay style. Like, she biologically could do that, but her humanity sort of dictates that little bit more attachment.
I think there's a degree of that, but the way I see Tashlet is that she sees the things that are human about her as being things that she can express and have be a part of her regardless of her physical form. I think that's the impression I get, but it's kind of difficult when she doesn't talk very much.
Yeah, I'm mostly going off what I vaguely remember from her interlude in like arc 9.
I can't believe I didn't think to go back and reread that when I answered that I'd take her as a familiar. Because that she was spending that whole time specifically thinking about how she felt about the Kenneteers.
Yeah, I also just remember her being really excited that she had like a mouth and hands and stuff again.
Also that, yes.
Okay, yeah. Thinking back on that, you're absolutely right. I think I've been misunderstanding that part of her character.
I think she's just really, really good at not making a fuss, which weird that Verona's interested in learning from her. Yeah, but sorry. So that whole conversation kind of cut off the end of you saying you wanted her as a familiar bird. But yeah, no, I see the appeal. Like, it's definitely, she's just a really cool person.
Yeah,
she's got those like mad chill surfer vibes,
living in a shack by the sea type thing.
Yeah. And Coro, we never got around to hearing your answer.
Well, it's my answer is very simple. Rook. I understand this would be a bad idea because Rook would absolutely treat this as like, first of all, Rook would only ever agree to something like this if she saw it as being strategically advantageous, which probably means that I would get screwed over and basically end up as a pawn for her. But at least one connected through close enough of a bond that probably not. I probably wouldn't get discarded. But I feel that I connect a lot with her nature in terms of how she tries to screw with boundaries, screw with definitions, tries to think of things strategically and position herself in ways that let her find a way through. But at the same time, I am so lacking in a lot of the things she has in spades, such as wisdom and I guess a maturity of purpose and drive. I think tying myself to Rook would be a great way to be forced to learn that kind of skill or very quickly sink. But I want badass Oni Grandma to be a familiar.
Yeah, you
or
serving the tea
vice versa.
like Reggie though.
Yeah. I'm okay with that. I'm so okay with that.
I mean, it's funny. Like the pitch to have an Oni as your familiar, like to the Oni, would just be such a hilarious conversation. Like, so listen, I know you stand against everything practice, but hear me out. That said, like, and Rook would probably put me in a cage for saying this, but it could be good for her as well to get that balance of like energy and input from a human, because as much as the practitioners are her enemies, she's quite disconnected from humanity in general, and like to the extent that I think it's a bit of a detriment.
I don't think she's unaware of that though. I think it's very much an intentional thing that she is doing in order to fight. Yeah, literally just to fight. She can't afford to be too human, because to be too human is to be exploitable. She isn't that. She is someone whose whole many lives is dedicated to the Oni cause.
Yeah, but I think like her burgeoning relationship with Lucy and perhaps Mrs. Influence could maybe reach the point where one day she's more willing to accept that like that's not the best way to go, I guess, is what I'm thinking.
Yeah, I think that'd be the way she would go if she had ever like won the fight, so to speak. Like if someone dismantled capitalism, I mean practice, then I think she could retire into a familiarship like that.
Yeah, because she's still very much in that stage where you need to do the fighting, whereas I suppose what I'm focusing on is a bit more the like once the fight is winnable, how do we do better?
Cough, cough, Kenneteers.
Yeah.
Okay. On a purely aesthetic level, I just want you all to consider how great it would be to have an extremely fussy, cranky Corvid just sitting on your shoulder, ordering you around and taking issue with everything you do wrong, but in a snarky way that you can never call them out on. Like, just aesthetically, that's just incredible.
That's true.
Coro, you and I are very different people.
I wouldn't enjoy it, but it would be so funny.
I sort of thought about it in the last few hours since I saw your note for it, and it made me think about how much we do and don't know about Rook in the first place. It brings to mind when she was discussing qualifying for her Order of Oni, and how in order to qualify you need to at least have lived for long enough to have 2 full lives, or it was sort of implied that way. It wasn't directly stated, but I interpreted it as you need to have lived an entire life and then turned around and lived another entire life, and then tying that to sort of the mask and switcheroo sort of thing that she does. I think she might collect identities in sort of tangible ways, in ways that she can separate from herself. And so I think that could actually be a point in your favor, Coro, because I don't think it's outside of the realm of possibility for her to create a new mask, a new identity, a new look, a new name, and then have that identity form the familiar bond with you and not the other ones. And so she might still be the warrior in other identities, but she can also, if need be, lean on the familiar bond and practice and whatnot to be that little bit more surprising. Like, just turn around and suddenly, instead of fighting an Oni, you're fighting a practitioner.
I love the idea of subverting expectations by being an Oni who uses practice. Like 3D chess level, like, double surprise. Okay, well, I suppose the newest question, and I don't know how long this one will stick around, but that we're going to start asking our guests.
The canon answer.
Obviously the Avery shipping wars are well and truly alive these days. So who do you ship Avery with, I guess?
I mean, Nora. They're just too cute. Like, I'm sorry, I'm a simple gal. I see 2 cute, yearning lesbians, and it's just like they're adorable. I don't know if it'll work out long term, but they're both reasonable and compassionate enough that at the very least I think it's a good idea for them to get in a relationship just to learn how to be in a relationship, because it won't end terribly, because they're really kind, reasonable people, and if life tears them apart or practice tears them apart, they'll remain friends. Unless there's something about Nora that we just don't understand. But I just think it would be, even if it's not long term, it would just be good for both of them.
And you've got to admit that Nora's whole facial expression can be best described as a deer in the headlights.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Wildbow's been doing his darndest to evoke that without just outright saying it, because it's already been used for Avery in the first few arcs.
Yeah, and she's a little bit doe-eyed. Like, it's in there.
Yeah. I mean, I remember like discussion about like, is Nora too much like the person Avery used to be? Is this Avery like trying to like make Nora something different? But I feel like Nora has a strong enough sense of identity and sort of self that that's not a huge issue. She is terrible at expressing that in a way that like meshes with how people expect her to act, and she's not very good at social interaction, but beneath it all she's got a very strong sense of what she wants to look like, what she wants to do, and I think that is enough to keep that element of things from becoming unhealthy.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think the more we've seen of Nora, the more it's been like, like Avery won't be just like, fixing her old self in the relationship. She's just helping to bring out who Nora is. And so far, it's all been pretty good stuff that's been coming out. So yeah, I agree. I think Nora's probably my pick as well. I know all the Liberty fans out there will be disappointed, but yeah, I'm full on board. Avery and Nora feels like the best one for Avery right now.
Okay, here's a question for both of you then. Does Nora stay innocent in this relationship?
This is the question that means I can't back Avery and Nora, because I think they're a good, solid couple, but they can't be a good, solid couple with Nora being innocent. You know what I mean?
It is the big wrinkle for sure.
I think that Avery could make it work. I think that Avery could straight up tell Nora, there are parts of my life that I can't talk about, and I think that Nora would understand that, especially with how good Avery is about communicating those kinds of things.
I'm not saying that she couldn't do it. I'm just thinking that I don't think Avery would.
Yeah, the idea of a relationship that kind of has one foot out the door a bit like that doesn't feel Avery to me. But then again, I mean, we had that whole moment in, I think it was late Arc 12, where Avery really sat down one night and was like, I think I've been thinking about romance in an unhealthy way and I need to calm the fuck down. So maybe the practice of being in a relationship where she can't go all in like that would actually be kind of good for her.
Which relates to my answer, which is a bit of a cop-out, but I don't think any of the ships are good enough for Avery. So I'll start with a bit of a preface in that there was a mention at some point, I don't know, a week or two ago, where Avery had a lengthy to-do list to do with her struggles in this arc and having a lot of things to do when she wasn't sure how she could manage them all. And I don't think Avery is the type to ever actually finish off a to-do list, which isn't the same thing as saying like abandoning the to-do list. But I think if she gets to the end of the list and sort of ticks all the boxes and whatnot, it's kind of a failure for her to keep moving more than it is a success at getting things done. Avery's always getting things done. She's like the most active, the most like chasing goals. She's hitting paths. She was the first person to do the ritual, the first person to define herself as a practitioner. She was the first choice as a practitioner by Miss in the first place. She's always going to be moving. And I don't think she is going to like settle down into a permanent relationship at age 14, which isn't to say that I think she isn't going to commit to a relationship. I think she's going to go the opposite of what we were saying before with the one foot out the door. She's going to go both feet first. She's going to be all the way in. She's going to be completely dedicated to that person, hold nothing back, definitely not hide the fact that she's practicing long term, or at least past like a still figuring each other out stage in the case of, say, Nora. But I do think after a few years or a few weeks or whatever it happens to be, I think that Avery will come to a point where she has a branching path and she has to say goodbye. And I can absolutely envision Avery as a 30-year-old in, let's say 30-year-old, like in Lucy's wedding vision, tattooed, traveled, seen the world. I fully expect her to have a handful of close friends that she used to date who will hold a candle for the one that got away, who is Avery, because she is perfect.
But this is just so clearly indicating that it should be Janine. Like, this is what you've said are all the exact points for why I think Janine is the perfect answer. Because the relationship with Janine can be short term in a way that Nora and Liberty probably can't.
Yeah, and I could see that. I could see that happening with Janine. I could see it happening with Nora, and I could see it happening with Liberty. Like, I just don't think any of those three are truly like Avery's complement in the way that she's looking for.
I think you're right, considering that moment I referenced in Arc 12 where she thought about how she didn't want to think about romantic relationships like that. You are probably onto something that the answer is none right now. But that's boring, so I reject the premise and I'm back on Nora.
And I don't think she's going to abstain from dating forever. Like, I do think she will go on some dates with Nora, but presuming that, say, like, Liberty doesn't take out the competition, or Janine muscle out everyone's attention or something like that. I think she...
One way... Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, you go. I was sort of winding down anyway.
I think that one way that Avery could, like an older version of Avery, could find a relationship that doesn't necessarily have to involve the practice is just getting involved with someone with a similar kind of focus, but entirely on the innocent side of things, like someone that is constantly traveling around the world for work. I think, and that has their own sort of extremely rich, complicated life that they maybe can't talk entirely about. I think Avery, in finding a kind of parody with that, would be able to have an actually pretty healthy relationship by limiting the scope of what gets talked about, what gets discussed, to the things that both of them find mutually important, without necessarily have to involve like the specifics of what they're doing.
Like those romance stories, like I can't remember exactly the name of it, but the Time Traveler's Wife or something, where they're together for their whole lives, but they're not actually together for a large part of it. Like it's sort of a journey they're both taking that sort of keeps circling back to each other because of that attraction.
Yeah, I can absolutely imagine Avery doing that. Yeah,
like will disappear for a year and then just pop out of a path and go on a date.
Yeah. I can absolutely imagine Avery doing something like that in a way that is that works for her. I mean, she's always been, a lot of what Avery does, or Avery has been figuring out, is that she needs to find ways to define her relationships in ways that account for her pretty unique circumstances, and finding ways to navigate things that fulfill her need without necessarily referencing like conventions, and I think that would be one way for her to do that.
To walk her own path, perhaps?
Oh.
Yes, Bird. That sure is a way to put it.
I'm very pleased with myself.
I've just got to say, I really enjoy the decision in the story to introduce Snowdrop as like the familiar candidate for Avery and have them go through with that, but still maintain it as just like a extremely platonic, close friendship. Like there's been absolutely zero notion of any romance between them, and I think it would have been so easy to dip into, the person she more or less had a magical marriage ceremony with, is like exploring that as an option, and the story's just had zero interest in that, and I think it's been better for it.
Yeah, it'd be almost creepy
definitely.
if it had have gone the other way. Not even almost, really. It would have taken quite a lot of justification and finagling to make that not a very deeply unfortunate dynamic.
Oh, and also narcissistic, considering she's literally made from pieces of Avery to start with. But yeah, I don't know. I just also think, like, as a decision to have a character who one of their major arcs, especially for the first half of the story, was dealing with their idea of relationships, to introduce them to like a platonic life partner like that is just so much more interesting as a way to explore how Avery handles connections.
Absolutely agree.
But yeah, so I guess we should move on to our next obligatory section, which is to talk about the arc title. Obviously, we are reflecting on playing a part, and to play a part is basically, if you are involved in an event or a situation, if you make a difference in something, you've played a part. You can also play the part, which is, to fit yourself into a tropey role or something. So I guess how do we think Wildbow's used this word in our arc?
They're apart from each other as well, is the other one that I think is worth.
Oh yeah, I see. They're all playing a part.
Yeah, exactly. Especially because Verona heads off to Thunder Bay, and Lucy's isolation is very much a part of this arc. No pun intended.
You can't get away from it. Yeah, I also think, like, we saw so much of Verona, and then also Lucy towards the end. They're doing like the fetches, which is very much you're setting up the fetch to play a part that you don't want to,
or even like playing the part of you.
Yeah.
One. Go ahead.
Yeah. Obviously, the last one I sort of had was obviously they're currently concocting this scheme to take down Charles. And so they're sort of playing the part of not being schemers, I guess. Because I guess it just jumped out to me that all this scheming against Charles is happening in the dreams and stuff, and that's a very they're playing ignorant, I suppose, is the connection I made with regards to plotting against Charles.
I think the thing that stood out to me most is the negotiation of what role Kenneth Beneath and its factions will be playing in Canada as a whole, nailing down the parts that will be played and who will fill those. There's also one thing that just came to mind, which part as a verb, so playing a part, playing out a parting. There was a lot of focus on departures and goodbyes this arc, especially from Lucy. The one that's coming to mind most of all is Wallace, and how much her mindset sort of focused around that moment of a goodbye and the loss of that connection.
And also, Wallace's joints keep coming apart.
That's true. Yeah, they do. We've got
moving on.
Moving on. We've got the parts Avery and Verona, their disguises, and the way that they were quite literally putting themselves in, playing the part of these kids that were being sucked into Thea's painting, and the way so much of that whole heist sequence focused around assuming different roles. We had on Lucy's end, we had her also donning a disguise and pretending to be something she wasn't in order to capture Marlin.
Yeah, I guess if you look at the arcs of the three Kenneteers sort of as a whole, you could frame Verona's as being around, going over to Thunder Bay to sort of play the role of support, as well as kind of trying to hide how bad her injuries are and how badly she's coping with everything, and I guess just playing down how bad all of the stuff is going with her. Then Lucy kind of spent the majority of this arc on her end, trying to play the part that Verona usually plays by handling the Undercity and kind of trying to, do what Verona had entrusted her with. And I guess on Avery's, I'm not sure, I guess she was trying, the role on of being a super spy.
Any other thoughts on the arc stuff?
So, the Lucy at the end, I can't remember what chapter it is now, but with the family, she was playing her guitar apart from the family. But yeah, more seriously, the emphasis on playing a part, all three of the girls feel like they're sort of semi-invested in the role they're currently in. They're faking it a little. They're playing the part, but it isn't what they want to be. It isn't. It's just by necessity. So Lucy is playing at being a cop, but she's uncomfortable with it. Avery is playing at being the gopher / spy for the Lord of Thunder Bay, but she's not that invested in Thunder Bay. Verona playing at being the kingmaker in the Undercity, but really she's just trying to run away. It feels like I
really like that.
They're not in it. They're not dedicated, and they shouldn't be.
And I guess to cap off the arc, we have Gilkey, who is a shell of self filled with cruel poison that was once someone else, constantly grappling with the way that his routines and identity is sort of connected to this person that used to hold the self that he now is, and how he is and how the things he's doing to escape that identity are in some ways acts that don't really play to his strengths or the things that he needs.
Yeah, one of the things that jumped out to me in the Gilkey interlude is each section began with him defining what he was. Like, he'd open each one with like, I am a tool, like blah 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 blah, which is very much leaning into that vibe that you're describing.
Yeah. It's and in the end, I think it's very appropriate that this arc about playing a part ended in a fairy market, where the where the schemes of all these people grappling with identities and trying to be something they're not or someone they're not all come sort of collapsing down and coming to a conclusion that in some ways is incredibly destructive.
I like that. Yeah. Cool. Well, I guess the last little segment that we have here is our evolved version of the whodunit, the bold and specific predictions on what like the end game is for the story. Where are we going from here? What's in our future?
I will die on this hill. At some point at the end of the story, the wolf of the paths will come down and at least temporarily replace Charles after messily devouring him. And nobody will be happy about this except the wolf.
I mean, okay, I do have to say, the thing I really like about this theory is kind of almost your ideal fall guy for the so the big issue with Charles is replacing the Carmine, because the Carmine is super powerful. If you get something like the wolf to replace him, but then the wolf's whole thing is to be an antagonist, so it will then inherently be antagonistic towards the system it's probably trying to prop up, which means it'll chew through all its power, become a shitty Carmine, and then it's in the perfect spot for someone kind of shittier tier like Grandfather to kill it and become the Carmine. Like, you put up with a few bad weeks of the wolf so that it can act as a fall guy.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that, but that is absolutely true. See, I was just thinking of it as the wolf is going to come in, do something terrible to Charles, and then the last act of the story is going to be, well, how the hell do we deal with this now? But I like that a lot better.
Okay.
Mine's certainly more optimistic.
I was just about to say that's a very optimistic take, Elliot, that it'll be a self-solving problem in true Otherverse fashion.
Yeah, if you think about how this maps to real life, right, what you do is you get the even worse dictator and they burn things out real quick, and then you get to put the good dictator in. That's
that's how this always works
in history.
Oh, yes, that's fine.
And you were saying how the wolf being antagonistic and sort of fighting its own nature would make it a less strong Carmine. The Carmine, the very embodiment of conflict and violence and blood. And I definitely can't see a constantly at war Carmine be empowered somehow.
Well, my hope is it would overextend itself with its new powers, which is, definitely a short and bloody revolution if it works.
Yeah, it's a problem that'll solve itself. Yeah.
I do feel that, like, the wolf might actually be the most scrupulously fair Carmine, in the sense that it will try to be the ideal worst antagonist to everyone that it's judging. Nobody's going to be happy, but I think everybody is going to be equally unhappy.
The perfect government.
That's one way to achieve fairness. Equally terrible.
Equally terrible.
All right, so my bold and specific prediction is that, god damn it, that fucking house that Verona lives in is going to burn down, and Verona is going to make it happen.
Now, just to be clear, this is not a Pale Reflections. I'm sure I've seen you write down this theory. I want to say months ago.
Oh yeah, I've been writing this for quite a while now. I've had longer explanations of it in the past, but the moral of the story is that I don't think burning down the house is going to ruin Brett, because I don't think the goal is to ruin Brett. Brett is an abuser. He's a piece of shit. He doesn't need to be in Verona's life. But like, I'm not going to suggest that, Lucy comes in and castrates him 3 times, and it's not the approach that's necessary for just some dude who's kind of a prick. But a lot of the issues that Brett have is that he sort of put himself into a corner that he feels like he needs to work 2 jobs to maintain this house that is barely lived in, that he doesn't need, to maintain a life that he doesn't have anymore. And like he's just stuck in a rut, and and Verona is like a rock at the bottom of that rut that he just keeps going around in a circle, and he just keeps running over that rock, and that rock gets ground down more and more. And so anything that can bust Brett out of the rut that he's in is better. Like if let's say Verona burns down that house, presumably it's insured. That'd be ideal if they just get a payout and then go live in a more like sensible house. Let's say it's not insured, or they figure out that it was foul play or something, and Brett is, hundreds of thousands of dollars in the hole or whatever. Actually, he's probably paid off the house. I'm not sure. But it's a problem that will force him to address it. He won't just be able to sit in his room sobbing about it. Either he'll like have to declare bankruptcy, or he'll have to pay off debt and live in a shitty little apartment and then have to give up Verona because of it. But whatever happens, Brett will not be in the rut that he is in, and therefore Verona will not be in the rut that she is in.
I love this series so much.
Yeah, same.
Just break him down a bit, Like he's just I don't know. Just the life equivalent of getting a quick, punch in the face. It's going to hurt him. He's not going to enjoy it, but it'll shock him into line.
I do think. Go ahead.
Oh, Brett has chewed through the graces he should be given for the non-painful, like snap to options. Like I think we've given Brett his fair runway of like, this is what you like, you will do this nicely. Like he's used that all up.
I think that if this happens, it will not be a fire. I think it will be a flood, because Verona has experience in destroying houses by flooding them.
And
Borrow Tashlet.
Speaking of, I think that'd work really well, because there is so many parallels between Verona and Matt. Well, Brett and Matt, and Verona and Edith, unfortunately, where I think that a solution to one will also be related to the solution to the other. And flooding Edith's house is just beautiful, and she can cry me a fucking river in her basement.
I wrote down in our notes. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, how funny would it be if they flooded Edith's house, and so she managed to fucking convince Brett to let her move in as like a paying tenant or something into it. I don't know if they have a spare bedroom, but just the thought of Edith playing back at them flooding her house by moving in with Verona would just be morbidly hilarious.
Well, Edith moves in with Verona. Verona goes and moves in with Matthew. That kind of solves all the problems, to be honest.
See, now I'm imagining, I think this has been brought up on this podcast before, but just the utter shit show that would be a potential romance between Brett and Edith.
Yeah, like, even Brett and Edith don't deserve Edith and Brett. Like that. Neither of them deserve each other. That's how bad they are.
But I still kind of want to see them try, just to watch it. See, the really scary thing is the idea that somehow between their incredibly fucked up patterns of behavior, that they actually make it work. Imagine how fucked up that would be.
Yeah, honestly, the biggest...
I would love to see that.
Problem with this... Yeah, honestly, the biggest problem with this would be that, like, Edith's problem is that she's so obsessed with Matthew. We need to find the way to make her obsessed with Brett instead. But I mean, as we're saying all this, I feel like we've already got the fun version of that horror show, which is kind of Melissa and Bracken. Like, they're already kind of fitting into that niche of, like, two dipshits who weirdly, you're like, I think these two might be good for each other.
That's such a harsh takedown of Melissa and Bracken's budding relationship.
It's like that, except I actually want good things for Melissa and Bracken.
Oh, yeah. No, I'm not saying they're the same. I'm saying that it's that general niche of like wanting to watch a bit of a train wreck that might somehow work out. Yeah, no, they're not as bad as Edith and Brett, but they're like that general idea. I think they're fulfilling the niche.
And that's sort of what I was saying with the Brett and burning down the house rather than like assaulting him directly and running him out of town or whatever. It's not that I don't want good things for Brett. Like, he's a piece of shit, but he's also just like a dude. And Edith is also deeply unhealthy in her approach to relationships. But like, if Matt didn't exist, like if Matt got murdered tomorrow and couldn't come back, then Edith probably would move forward like in life as a pretty helpful person to have around. Like now that she hasn't got her victim, and so just separating Verona and Brett and Edith and Matthew, I think would do a lot in terms of, I hesitate to say good, but like prevention of the bad.
Yeah, like because Brett's only a bad person in that he has this role as a father. Like if Verona had moved out when her mum left and gone with her mum from the get-go, Brett would just be sad. Like he wouldn't be. I don't feel like we'd have this animosity for him because it'd be mostly replaced with pity. The anger comes from the fact that he's so failed to step up while he has this responsibility.
And likewise with Edith, like she is the absolute fucking worst when it comes to Matt. But like as a sort of instructor to the girls, she was pretty good. Like she has, and she's like maintaining the life of Edith James. Like she has positive things that she's doing and bringing to the world. It's just that she's also an abuser, and we need to prevent her from being an abuser. But other than that, you don't really need to make that many changes.
Yeah. That's such an interesting idea, the concept of somebody who's really a villain just because of where they are right now, not because they're inherently like a shitty person.
Are you suggesting that the Otherverse says that the systems that someone lives in affect their behavior?
No.
Definitely not. That was too wild.
Preposterous.
But one more thing with my prediction is that I am going to swing for the fences and say that Verona's domain, Demesnes, is going to be rebuilt on the ashes of the burned, flooded, and generally smoked home.
This is so many levels deep as a prediction.
I love it.
Go hard or go home.
Honestly, though, I'm imagining Verona's domain as like something that starts in a shadowy, flooded basement and then just gets weirder from there. And that fits her so well.
Oh yeah, her domain is going to be fucking wild.
Yeah, having a domain that is like fundamentally the destruction of a home, or like I feel like that sort of balance is something that Verona will get a lot of utility out of.
I mean, the imagery of being the phoenix rising from the broken ashes of that shit broken home definitely doesn't feel like the worst thing to lean into.
But then the question is, what is she going to do to tie in the story of her hand to make that fate pass on to someone else? Because, like, I say we shouldn't necessarily physically assault Brett, but if we accidentally inflict a permanent hand injury on him to spare his daughter, then, you know, at least he contributed something.
Yeah. The framing it through the lens of this is a gift he can give Verona so she can live a better life, which he has been failing to do in his job right now, definitely makes it more palatable to me as an idea.
Especially before, when I drew the parallel between the hook hand being that invisible injury and the trauma that Brett is subjecting her to.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I think that's just about everything except for the Backed to Pact section, which will be coming soon. But yeah, thank you, Coro and Bird, for joining us.
It has
Thank you
been
very
delightful.
much for having me. It's been wonderful.
Yeah, it's been great to have you here. Do either of you have any things you'd like to tell our audience to go and check out?
Well, not yet. But I would like to publicly announce an intention to do a full spoilers Otherverse podcast at some point. Definitely not before the end of Pale, but I would love to do a analysis of the Otherverse and what it's doing with the context of it, of the whole thing. Things like the ideal would be something like the audio version of Megafire's essays.
Yeah.
But maybe a little bit less serious. Well, definitely there would be serious ones, but definitely some jokey ones, like something to do with goblins. But yeah, I would like to have a a more sort of holistic approach to the Otherverse that's less reliant on the live read format.
Yeah, I wish you luck with that, because that idea terrifies me, because I can barely keep up with what the story's doing with the excuse of, oh, it's going on live and we have a schedule to keep and blah, blah, blah. The idea that you would try to talk about like all the stuff it's doing feels like a monumental task.
It's by no means going to be comprehensive, if only because it's a world that keeps growing. But I particularly find it difficult when you want to talk, well, not you specifically, but the collective you want to talk about, say, how the Fae work in setting. Like, it is a real slog to, like, go through all of the, like, introductions of different Fae and then how their plots sort of develop through the story, and then what the ends of those plots look like and what they were doing. And, like, it is difficult. And so just having, like, a section where I can, say, go on about my essay with goblins representing unique self-interest and sort of that particular style of life. It's like just having it all in one place, I think, would be very valuable.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the plug there is, feel free to contact me in the Discords with any ideas for how you think particular things work and things that should be highlighted. So if you have a big theory on how Fae work, or goblins, or demons, or whatever, then hit me up.
I don't have anything to plug, but I invite you all to join me in hounding Bird until this happens.
All right. Well,
thank you so much.
Thank you both for joining us. We'll be going back to Pact in a second, but before then, if you enjoy the show, why not check out our Twitter, where we post daily variable quality memes.
Yes, you can also head to the Do For Media website, doformedia.com, to find out about all the other shows on the Do For Media network. While you're waiting for Bird's podcast to come out, there's more Otherverse podcasting already happening on Doof with Pale in Comparison, so you can slot that in and listen to the two podcasts go while you wait for Birds to make it 3.
Yeah. If you want to support the Doof Media Network, go to patreon.com/doofmedia. And if you want to support Wildbow, go to patreon.com/Wildbow. Now, shall we go back to Pact?
Let's do it.
All right. Who has some Pact spoilersy stuff that they want to bring up?
Okay, I want to bring up something that I've been wanting to talk about since this character showed up, but I've been saving it for this back to Pact. We've got the Tearaway Kid, who obviously has lent into various bits of angel imagery, and I'm kind of rocking this tinfoil maybe that the Tearaway Kid is genuinely an angel who fucked off to the paths rather than deal with reality.
So that makes sense, because like any given lost is a discarded something somehow, somewhere.
Yeah, I guess I'm just viewing it almost less as like I could almost picture him being one who went there intentionally and has just spent so much time in the paths. He's closer to fitting the definition of what, like, I guess, compared to like how Corvidae was constantly classified as a boogeyman. He wasn't, but he fit a lot of the criteria because of all his trips to the abyss. I could almost see the Tearaway Kid being, lots of people think he's a lost, and he kind of plays into that role a bit, but really he's actually just an angel who helped build reality and then realized it was shit and left.
Yeah, because like Corvidae went to the abyss specifically to pick up the label of boogeyman.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I find it hard to think of a way to make an angel lost, just because they're so deeply built into like creating things that like it's hard to isolate them from things, because like if you stick them in a box, they're going to fill up that box with stuff, or like
the Tearaway Kid specifically is like, even outside the like being an angel, is there's such a focus on creation with him.
Exactly.
And angels, the imagery that like pops up a lot around them is like visages and faces and multiple faces. I think I'm on board for this.
As a slightly spoilery addendum to this, as I said, we are recording this after having recorded talking about 16.1 and 16.2. He has a distinct hatred of the concept of weekdays in 16.2, and obviously we know that the choirs of both angels and demons map to the concept of the 7 days, which has inspired the 7-day weeks that we still follow. So his hatred of weekdays is born from him trying to discard his original label. I'm getting real deep on this theory.
Yeah, I love the theory. I don't necessarily believe it. I wouldn't put money on it, but I love it.
I mean, I guess one thing to do would be to try to work backward from, all right, what is he now, and then what would an angel that becomes that have dominion over come from originally?
Yeah, I could see him having something to do with. Oh God, it's been so long since I looked at the list of the 7 choirs.
Especially the angel one.
Yeah, his concept of disguise and stuff makes me want to lean into concepts of identity. I'm trying to think. One of the days of creation, was it the second one where the firmament was separated from the sky and the ocean? Maybe that sort of choir. The day where creation sort of started to get divided up into its roles, I guess. I don't know. I haven't put much thought into this side of the theory,
I think,
I'm going to be honest.
For me, I would want to say the opposite side, the opposite choir to Pause's, because he's all about inverting the order.
Yeah.
And messing with the distinction between man and beast and king and hierarchy and all of that. And so an angel specifically about the creation of the social aspects of that, then they can be I'll just create a outfit, which is very society related, that puts me in this particular social position of angel. It's hierarchical position. It's I will just make an outfit that puts me in this particular spot.
I mean, I imagine that as an angel, the job would be more I am going to create the role of father or hunter or client, crafting, not just crafting identities to wear, but crafting those identities into the facet of the world.
Which does sort of line up with him wanting to rescue his girlfriend, because if he put that much effort into a costume to convince a giant city bird to presumably do it, then it makes sense that once they've created that connection, it is somewhat real and they're pretty dedicated to it, because the angel's issue is that they also can't destroy. And so once they make that costume, they can't unmake it. That could be an advantage of using the paper, and becoming lost, is it gives them that little bit more opportunity to not just create, but also craft and then discard.
Okay, I want to hit you with a much deeper layer of tinfoil that you've just inspired me with. I'm not as attached to this idea yet, but okay, so we know that the angels were creation and the demons were destruction, right? And then at some point, humanity kind of evolved as this third pillar of change. But somebody must have created humanity at some point for that to happen. What if the focus of the disguises is more about the changing of yourself or whatever? And so the Tearaway Kid was partially responsible for the development of stuff like evolution, which that crew of angels just way over succeeded and achieved, and now humanity took over as that third pillar. And so maybe he's not running away. Maybe he was exiled. Okay, no, I'm not backing that one. But
so what you're saying,
the disguises are more about he's about changing forms and stuff, and maybe there were angels whose focus was on the idea of creating the ability to change.
So this is not just an angel, but straight up Milton's Lucifer.
I mean, I don't like that part of it, but maybe there were dozens of angels that were involved. I don't know. Just the seed of the idea was that maybe the disguises is less about defining roles and more about the idea that his thing was about instilling the ability to change or something.
I love that.
I do love it as a concept. I
don't think it's true.
I still don't subscribe to it, but
but I love it.
But it's so fun. Yeah.
I hope it's one of the it sits in that realm of headcanon stuff where it will never be confirmed or deconfirmed. I want it to live in that realm of tinfoil where 10 years from now there'll be avid fan arguments between the believers and the non-believers.
If it wasn't Wildbow specifically that we were talking about, I'd say I wouldn't even want it to be true because the execution would never match the tinfoil, you know? But if anyone can pull that off, it's Waldo.
Yeah, 100%.
I feel like this is the kind of thing that just cannot ever be executed on, where it's the sort of thing that like has to be drawn together from inferences, but if it's ever said outright, it just immediately loses all power.
And it's also like that's not the story Pale's telling. Pale would have to get way more invested in the concept of creation and angels, I think, for it to be worth clarifying inside of Pale.
So you're saying it'll come up in the threequel?
Yes, exactly.
If the Tearaway Kid ends up being the final antagonist of Pyre, you will be so vindicated.
No, he's the one angel who's actually good. Like, just because he's a cool guy. Like, that's the thing. Okay. After dealing with dipshits like Faisal and all the other angels, it's going to be the runaway angel who's actually the good one.
I mean, it makes sense if he's run away from the structured angel stuff. You know, he might be different to the other angels.
Yeah, based on the like angels that we have met so far in this series, I am just instinctively going to trust the one that fucked off a lot more than the ones that stuck around.
All right, here's a question. Are there any others or characters that you can construct a plausible argument for being an angel in disguise or an angel that fucked off at some point?
Miss.
Huh.
Oh, I thought Miss was Hazel this week.
Miss is a gutted angel, right? So she hasn't got the face, she hasn't got the hands, because she is an angel that lost a fight with a demon. She irreparably lost those things. And so she had to figure out a way to create without those sections of her being. And so she's just doing it by having that insight into people and things and others and places and forging the connections based on that insight. So she no longer has the power of creation, but she does want to create the structures that can fight the destruction of the world.
Well, yeah, she's been pretty defined by wanting to create something outside of the Seal of Solomon. And that would go a little ways to explaining just, frankly, how scarily powerful her sight is. Like, something that we probably don't give enough credit to on this podcast is just like, it's been kind of explained away that, Miss has like pretty good insight to stuff because she's lost and that's like her special lost sight, like how Snowdrop can see a bit around corners or whatever. But like Miss's is, like the tidbits Miss will just instinctively drop about how stuff works is incredibly powerful. Like if Wondercand had found her first, she'd be like one of their top slaves.
Taking the tinfoil off for a second, because now we're in back-to-back, I can draw the comparison. The man in the ill-fitting suit who...
A defenestration man.
Yeah, the defenestration man who, you know, overpowered Barbatorum in that one niche that they truly, like, live in. Like, they're super narrow, but powerful within that narrowness. I think that's a large part of why all of the Lost tend to be as, like, overwhelmingly powerful in one particular niche. And so, like, Miss is, like, the actual reason I think Miss is so good at this is because, like, that's the one thing that she can do. And, like, the actual reason why Snowdrop's ability to lie is so, like, powerful, and the ability to, like, shrug off disguises is because, like, that's just her. That's what she is. And, like, Soot Sleeves and her, like, entire kingdom of a self, like it and obviously the Tearaway Kid and the power of his disguises is just because that is, like, the one thing that they can do, and so they do it super powerfully.
Have we considered, though, that Snowdrop could be an angel in disguise?
Okay. I think we've got to start taking layers of tinfoil off, gang. We put too many on.
All right.
We're too deep.
We're too deep.
Okay, I had another just point I wanted to bring up, and I don't know if we talked about this in our Arc 14 one. I don't remember it if we did, but it's just really fun to consider what some of the Pact characters might be thinking at the moment, like as Musa is taking over, you know, an area that I believe includes both Toronto and where Jacob's Bell was. Like, I'm thinking, you know, like Conquest or the Sisters or whoever the fuck is in charge of Toronto these days. What's going on over there compared to what we're seeing in Thunder Bay? if Rose is ever coming out of the abyss these days. What's she thinking? What's Alistair up to?
I think we've discussed in the past how Alistair is absolutely the one teaching advanced diabolism at the BHI, right?
Yeah, I think that theory has been proposed here. I like the idea that Alistair would also he would be involved in Moss's plot as like similar to like Y as a kind of contractor they've hired. The Bahame vibe, even though Alistair was the likable Bahame, I just feel like the Bahame vibe would be to side with Mossa.
Air quotes on likable.
Well, yeah. Look, I mean, there were extenuating circumstances. Everyone else was distinctly unlikable at the time.
I think it would be very funny if one day, off-screen, Conquest just walked up to Musser, beat the shit out of him, stepped into his place, and nothing changed.
just like a nothing point in the story where they're just like, all right, in this paragraph, Musser gets overtaken by Conquest, and then literally nothing else in the plot changes.
Yeah.
As you can see, he has white hair now. That's the difference.
Well, just especially because if Conquest has retaken any of Toronto, like, I mean, he must hate that Mossa is outdoing him, right? Like,
honestly, I went the opposite. I thought he'd love it.
Well, no, I feel like he needs to be the one doing it. Maybe that's unfair to him, but like, I would see Conquest. Actually, yeah, maybe Conquest would just want to side on, but then you'd have to be protected against him trying to take it over because that's what he's going to try and do.
Yeah,
let him into the plan.
Yeah, like I absolutely see him like being temporarily sort of empowered just by the presence of so much Conquest in his immediate area, just enough that he can pull what is it, inevitable, the power that incarnations have, just to like start a little Conquest and like just get a toe in on that whole province worth of conquering that's going on. And then once he's in there, it would be very difficult to prevent him from like taking it over.
Yeah, especially if like I could see you getting him on board with it and being less of a direct problem if you especially left a territory or two outside Toronto to like for him to take. Like if as part of the process he was allowed to expand his territory.
Like letting
he might find that really difficult to say no to.
Letting Conquest conquer has to be a part of that plan.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is that anything that can be phrased as allowing or letting Conquest do anything, Conquest is going to take enormous offense to, just on principle.
Yeah, it depends how you sell it. Like you got to do like Blake did, right? Like the only reason Blake made it out of Toronto alive is he kept framing things as forcing Conquest to have to conquer him. So like, yeah, you wouldn't offer that land to him. You'd make him take it from you. But like, I think Musser's clever enough to plan to cede some of the ground in a way that seems authentic.
Can I just stop you and say, did Blake make it out of Toronto alive?
That's fair. I mean, a Blake made it out of Toronto.
Questionably alive.
Quote unquote alive.
This is a complete tangent, but imagine how funny any story that involves an incarnation of betrayal or similar would be. Just because you'd
have to be such a dipshit to ever team up with an incarnation of betrayal.
So basically Marvel's Loki.
Yeah.
What a fun idea for a short story.
I think we can work together, Betrayal. Betrayal just looks at you like, are you dense?
Says Greed.
No, it has to be, a spirit of betrayal is forced to team up with, I don't know, some other kind of incarnation of a similarly... Greed is maybe a good option, something similarly corrupting and just...
Yeah.
Just a race to the bottom.
Adventures, yeah.
Like how in Arc 8 we had, it was like Yearning, Inquest, and someone else. Hunt, that was it. And they were like three incarnations who'd kind of formed a squad around the overlap in their concepts. And this would be like the trash dumpster fire version of that team up. Like just a group of backstabbers who all team up and just constantly bring each other down.
Something like a Suicide Squad. I also had sort of a bit more like specifically packed stuff, which is how do we feel like the Kenneteers or like Kennet generally would manage like different parts of pact turning up on their doorstep? Like, let's say Verona walked into Blake in the Undercity at some point in Arc 3 versus Arc 9 versus Arc 13 versus the epilogue. Like, how do we think that'd go?
I mean, if it's Verona, honestly, all bets are off.
Yeah.
Like, depending on how things are going with her, they'd probably either end up as, like, best friends or get involved in a brawl that would result in, like, a good quarter of the Undercity going up in flames.
See, I can't picture a situation where Verona and Bloke don't end up talking about it and kind of figuring something out, because like so much, even in Arc 13 when Blake went on that little murder spree, he was still usually trying to talk about it, and I could see Verona just being able to use that, because that's also Verona to me is the like quote unquote Blakey protagonist. I just feel like those two would get on like wildfire.
Yeah, I feel like
I think they would get on exactly like wildfire in that maybe they would end up like talking it out, but there's going to be some collateral along the way.
It's some.
Yeah, there's a risk they could also end up acting as enablers for each other.
Yeah. I actually think that
oh god,
that Arc 3 Blake, like the practitioner Blake who's fated to die, who has oodles of bad karma and is just like a generally bad news for everyone involved. I think that Blake would be the one least Kennet friendly, which is interesting because like he's a literal monster afterwards, like a serial killer, violent, Blake. But it's the early Arc Blake that I think would be the least able to be worked with.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I mean, I was going to say we've already seen how karma can influence the Kenneteers' opinions of people like Charles, but in the end, Charles ended up completely validating what karma was telling them, so that's not a great example.
I mean, that's definitely Charles's whole shtick, railing against the system and then validating everything that it has ever done to him.
And let's be fair, it's not like Blake turning up isn't extremely bad news for everything involved.
Oh, yeah.
I have a terrible, terrible idea. What if Blake from later on in the story turns up? I feel like if he hadn't already had that familiar relationship with Evan, there would be a non-zero chance of him ending up as Verona's familiar.
Oh yeah, she is very like freedom-y, isn't she? Like someone who ran away from home and built their own life, and and he's definitely got aesthetic.
See,
she
again,
would love the aesthetic.
Most Verona compatible. I see Verona as the most Blake compatible protagonist in this story. Like in 15.1, where she just went psycho in the hospital, was very reminiscent of late story Blake.
Yeah, definitely.
And you know what? They would also work together really well because Blake could borrow that humanity back from Verona and stop being, constantly struggling with the abyss. But also just like their styles of like Verona is very much like backline until she's not.
Oh yeah,
right.
so she can let Blake charge in,
or even like she'd set both of them up to basically smash in, charge in together. Blake acts as the muscle. Verona backs up and starts throwing around practice. They would get along like a house on fire. Yeah. And there would be so many fires.
I am so on board with this, but also how dare you compare Verona to Rose?
I mean, that's the thing, is that like I think that the character from Pact that Verona most reminds me of is probably Rusty, like the original pre-haircut Rose and Blake, because she's got like a lot of both of their best qualities and also a lot of both of their worst qualities of rolled up in one person.
See, in another world, Verona could have had her wish and become another, just like Blake. If only she'd had the right grandma.
Oh god. So, what do y'all think the two halves of Verona would look like?
Oh god.
Well, so you'd have Ronald and
McDonald.
Ronald?
Easy.
yeah,
And
yeah,
Vera,
Ronald
maybe?
McDonald Hayward.
Ronald and Vera? I could see that.
Yeah. And I guess if we go kind of along the same splits, well, I mean, I guess the whole point you were just saying that they're very similar to Rusty. I kind of see the two halves being
definitely.
kind of related to Blake and Rose, I guess. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, like definitely let's say Vera would have to be like the sponge for all of the trauma and whatnot. And just like all the scraps and all of the undesirable traits crafted in a way that is useful somehow. And then Ronald be the sort of custom built, perfect creative practitioner who's ruthless. And yeah, that parallel works eerily well.
What if it's... well, what if...
Well, because you're basically crafting the same thing. You're just replacing the, Blake's time in a cult with Verona's time in her house, which was, similarly as life-defining and awful.
Could it be true that Blake and Rose are split versions of Verona? How much time travel shenanigans do we need to make that happen?
This is some real Tyrion as a time-traveling fetus level tinfoil.
We do know that the Behames were actively involved in the planning of creation of Blake and Rose.
Yep.
And Verona doesn't fit in her current house and family.
Oh, she fits into her family so well that it's terrible.
That's the harshest thing you've ever said, Coro.
No, it's true. It's true though, isn't it? Like the worst thing about Verona is you can see bits of both her dad and her mum in her in very reasonable and hopefully eventually healthier ways. But she's definitely her parents' child.
Definitely.
All right.
That's okay. Let's all take off the layers of tinfoil again. I think we've wrapped too many times again.
All right.
Okay.
What else do we want to cover while we're here?
I have one more thing.
All right.
So, do you remember Sandra's tarot reading of Blake and Rose, trying to figure out who they are with the right and left-handed?
Yeah, in the middle of Arc 3, right?
Something like that, yeah. I would like to hear your... this is probably a big question to ask point blank, so I have got a answer ready, but how would you do the reading if you were writing that reading for Lucy, Avery, Verona, and Snowdrop?
Let me just pull up a list of the major arcana.
Yeah. My blocker here is going to be that I am woefully unfamiliar with the major arcana, including even the ones that came up in Pact that time.
Yeah, solid on the Chariot, the Fool, the Hanged Man, and...
Even the High Priestess, I only very vaguely remember what it's about.
The Chariot has to be Lucy, right? I feel like the Chariot just feels very Lucy.
What was the Chariot?
The Chariot is all about like being it almost gives me like Crusader vibes. I don't think there's much of a sense of justice, but very much like will and direction.
Oh, okay.
Well, it even has like specifically conquesty connotations.
I think that Lucy would be the Hierophant on the right hand and Justice on the left.
Ooh, see, I put Justice and or Judgment on the right hand.
So just to refresh my memory, the right hand was the one that you have a lot of, and the left hand was the one you need to work on.
Not
right?
quite. Yeah, it was the right hand is like how you interact with the world by default. So it's like your like forward face, your dominant hand. It's like the thing that you do. The left hand is sort of the counterpart to that, which reflects other things. It's a bit more awkward, but it's still like a part of you, and you're at your best when you're using your right and left hand together.
That's right.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, that's right. I got them mixed up. I will revise that. I think Lucy is Hierophant on the left hand and Judgment or Justice on the right.
Yeah, so because Justice is an easy like sort of pull for Lucy because it's like explicitly in the text that she's all about injustice and whatnot. But I think Judgment is almost a better fit, even though like the I would still use the word justice, but like the card judgment. And so that's sort of decision making and but on like both ways. And so like people judging you and you judging them and being at the mercy of those judgments, whether you like it or not, and how you deal with that. And so like I think Lucy is on the receiving end of judgment a lot, and she also hands out judgment a lot, and a lot of her focus is in like the responsible way to like deal with the judgment and dish it out. And so that's like it's very forward facing on her.
I like that.
And then the left hand, I've got either the Empress or the Emperor, like which is interesting because they're the two of the more like explicitly gender divided things, but we don't stock with gender in this podcast apparently. So the Empress is sort of healing, soothing, growing, compassion, caring, like that really, to specifically as the left hand of judgment, I would think of that as more like that like defender against injustice sort of vibe that Lucy's got going on. But the Emperor also works pretty well with that because it's all about the discipline and the structure and how to make the world the way you want it to be. And so I think that's something that Lucy sort of does pair with that sense of injustice. She wants to build the world that's structured in a way that there is that fairness, and like her bulletproof aspects are like very like structure and discipline-y focused. And so yeah, she's sort of got two different reads on the right and the left for me: the justice and judgment, and the Emperor and Empress.
I like the magician for Verona. I think that's very strong, which is all about like creativity and that kind of vibe.
Yeah,
so it definitely feels like who Verona is.
Verona was the one who I came up with the most options for because there was like varying degrees of optimistic I wanted to be. Where magician is sort of her at the most optimistic, where she is like confident and talented and full of knowledge and wants to share that knowledge. A less positive read on her is the Wheel of Fortune in the right hand. Because it's specifically reacting to like the cycles of good and bad fortune, and so that really reminds me of her house and how like when like the Wheel of Fortune is pointing the right way, she can get a lot done. When she's in that high active state at a like fulcrum moment, she can really, really make some effects. But also when the wheel sort of keeps turning and she gets the bad luck, like it just absolutely grinds her down and she can't function. And then even more pessimistically, I had her as that Hanged Man on the right hand, where she's constantly held back. She's stuck in a house. She has to wait until she's older. She has to hold back all the things that she can do. She is very much like a held back human being. That really defines her in a very right-handed way, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And then this is going to be in the left hand, I have Verona optimistically as the devil. Partly just because the devil is the most like carnal version, and like Verona is very carnally focused in a lot of ways, like following urges and instinct over reason. She makes decisions, and this is like even putting aside her and Jeremy. This is like her reaction to the praxis. Like she feels the urge to get more power, and so she puts herself at risk in order to get that power. And whenever you can't lean into those things, it's frustrating, and like the temptation to go wrong is always there. It's like, and that's specifically with her half-light practices. Like she's always on the edge of making a really bad decision, like with her hand. And then the less optimistic for her left hand is the Tower, which is the absolute ruin card. Like what people generally think of as death. Like it's like you lose, it burns down, too bad.
Yeah.
And partly because I want to burn down the tower that is that house. And also just because she's just always flirting with like absolute ruin all of the time. She's perpetually in that space. And I think having like the tower and ruin in her left hand means it's like if if it's the tower by itself, if it's just her left hand, it's awkward. She loses. She burns down, etc. But if it's working with the magician, then she can like apply that ruin to other people. Like she uses the knowledge to destroy Bristow or whatever. She's at her most powerful when she's applying that ruin. And then
sorry, I love this. I don't have much to comment. I'm just really enjoying learning all this.
All right, and so then Avery, I've got in the right hand as the star, which is like the hopeful journey, because like you have the guiding star. It's like very movement-y focused sort of one. It's moving towards better things. Like it's a very positive card for a very positive character. Like she is just the like shining light in the story. Like that's a pretty straightforward one for me. And then in the left hand, the lovers, because she is so focused on relationships and vulnerability and honesty and sharing, like just all of that. It's like she's at her best when she is both the guiding light and the person who's sharing all that she has. She's just a very positive person, our Avery. And Snowdrop, I've put as the High Priestess, but specifically the High Priestess upside down. Because the High Priestess is the important of intuition and awareness to achieve proper understanding, and like following your instincts and what. Actually, hang on, no, I think I might have gotten that confused when I was like flipping the magician upside down or something. But yeah, the like Snowdrop is so focused on like sort of anti-wisdom. Like she's so impulse focused in a way that isn't like it's not that it's bad. It is just that she sort of lets the instincts take over. Like she just wants to live a good life. She wants the the strawberry milk. She wants the chocolate. She wants a warm place to sit. You know, it's just like very core to her as a person. And then in the left hand, the world, which is the end of the journey, the enlightenment, and like the time to move on to the next stage. And I think that's like really core to it, because like Snowdrop's journey could have ended at the end of the path, the Forest Ribbon Trail. Like she is that wisdom, you know, having completed the journey and then moving on and building a better life, having learned from it. And like she's become that familiar. She's like applying that learning through Avery. And so with that mix of like intuition and love of a good life, and that she uses those together to just build a good life with Avery, who is also just a good person.
I love it.
Yeah, good.
Yeah,
that took way longer to talk about than I thought it would.
I think they're great.
I've been there. Yeah. That was great. We should definitely, on the Discord when this episode comes out, you should post this in written form as well, so that people can like see it all at once. Because looking at it all in front of me at once, it's definitely like an extra layer of appreciating it.
Why not write it up? You know, make an essay, publish it. You could do a podcast.
Put a podcast where you do a left-right analysis of every single Otherverse character one by one.
Why limit yourself to the Otherverse?
Yeah, true.
We'll go through the MCU.
I'm thinking Taylor has some real Chariot vibes.
Well,
cool.
That's everything we want to talk about, isn't it?
Yeah, that's everything in the notes.
Anyone else got any final thoughts before we wrap up? We've just crossed the 3-hour recording mark, so a classic length reflecting episode.
Cool.
All right. Well, with that, I suppose that's the end.